You're listening to Power Athlete Radio, a podcast dedicated to empowering your performance every damn day. Join former NFL pro and Power Athlete founder John Welborn as he dissects the greatest minds in strength, conditioning, and more. So whether your goal is to be the hammer, destroy mediocrity, or simply move the dirt, you've come to the right place. Now with the warm-up done, let the gains begin.
Hey, Power Athlete Radio listeners. Plug in for an amazing podcast with our good friend, Mr. Zach Even-Esh, who's founder of the Underground Strength Gym in New Jersey, author of the Encyclopedia of Underground Strength, and serves as a consultant for individuals, teams. He's a gym owner, he's a father, and he's into the old school. We consider him to be the historian of strength and somebody that has been in the strength game long before it was cool and has an intrinsic knowledge unparalleled. Zach's been a good friend of mine for a number of years, and I always look forward to spending time with him. So as you buckle in on this podcast, be regaled with not only his knowledge, but his ability to quote movies and just be a really good fucking dude. Mr. Zach Even-Esh.
Zach Even-Esh is on an unstoppable mission.
I would love to hear what the mission. What do you think my mission is?
I think your mission is to point out what you view as the ridiculousness and glitz and glamour and just this big facade of performance training and sport-specific training.
It's, well, what is your theme is battle the bullshit, and I'm going to tell you why. Let's rip out some motherfucking throats.
Dude, let's get some sound bites. I'm in.
Yes. So, I'm training at a high school full time. And today, ironically, you'd be happy to know, is day one of summer training. So I just had the incoming freshmen start today. But what also started today was quite a large group of athletes that didn't show up for the spring. Even if they didn't play baseball, lacrosse, they didn't show up. They go and do, quote unquote, I'm on my own program. Or I go to this other guy and I'm on speed and agility. And then I see them, I'm like, listen, I'm a private strength coach, but I have a problem when you go to a private strength coach and come back and you can't do a fucking recline row for one rep, or you can't do one push-up. I want to go and equalizer that strength coach, that quote unquote strength coach.
If has there ever been an issue, or let me put it like this, kid comes to you, I'm doing my own program, no big deal, you put him in and the kid's absolutely killing it, and the strength coach has been having him do the right stuff, and this kid's gonna do push-ups, pull-ups, and they're pretty solid. Has that ever happened?
Those kids do both. They'll train at the school and then they will go extra days to do their own thing. But it's pretty rare that a kid disappears and comes in with just great habits, squatting deep, full extension on pull-ups, or maybe their technique is good, but you know what they lack? This kind of humble demeanor of being able to be coached and kind of just coming right in and being part of the team. And to me, that takes discipline to train in a weight room that's maybe crowded and not quote unquote perfect. And, I'm kind of got the both sides of the coin. When we have private groups, we're on average 8 athletes in a group, right? 8 athletes. When we're busy, it's like 15 is really busy. We only have 3 squat racks. Not that everybody is, earned their way to putting a bar on their back or front squatting. But, I don't like to be there. It's too crowded. Well, I'll make sure that when you play football, everything is conveniently organized during the game to just make you feel comfortable. And I found that athletes that can't be coached, they don't want to get better. They just want to do the quote unquote my own program, or I train with my father in the basement or with my uncle here. And yeah, there's got to be kids that look good and move well, but man, it is heartbreaking when a kid disappears for months and comes back and looks like he got worse. And it's like, what has been going on? And see, that's why as a quote unquote strength coach or whatever people want to call us, I never have a program that's just speed or I'm just this or I'm just that, because you're in high school you're probably not strong enough. We need to do everything. We need to get you strong, fast, athletic.
There's this misnomer that these different, I guess you could call them like performance KPIs or performance indicators, like speed and agility, and this somehow exist in like vacuums, and they're like separate buckets. Oh, I'm working at like, maybe this is old NSAM, CS type stuff where it's like, okay, hey, I'm going to develop aerobic capacity, and then we're going to develop this. And they kind of look in these like different energy systems as like block periodization, not realizing that you kind of develop these in a concurrent model most effectively. Like if you're going to develop speed, you need to develop power, and you need to develop strength, and all these things kind of exist in a concurrent training model. I look in terms of like, power, and more importantly, like hypertrophy. If we're going to do a bunch of hypertrophy work, we're probably going to kind of err on that side a little bit. And then if we're doing more speed and power and more strength, we're going to err on that side. But for the most part, these kids just need to get stronger, because everything improves upon once you build a big platform of strength. I had Mark Riptoe here in the podcast room. He came down on Saturday and we did a little podcast. And it was good. He is just as prickly as he's always been. But we had a good discussion on like strength being the platform at which all life is built. Yeah. It's really the foundation for all athletic training.
He says a lot of great stuff. They do a lot of those, quick blurbs on his like video podcast or call in. And of course, people, he has a lot of haters, but it's pretty rare, like you're saying in high school, that, hey, this, even at my experiences at the college level, it was very rare that somebody was strong enough in this. The thing that happened in college was you start maybe meeting a little bit of the demands of the emotional preference, the personality trait of an athlete. So as you know, as an athlete starts to get to a very high level, they're all kind of weird. They have some sort of eccentricity, which is what makes them great. So some athletes would be like, hey, I want to do more like quote unquote fast twitch power stuff. Somebody else feels good lifting heavy, when maybe quote unquote scientifically he shouldn't be lifting heavy. But you know what? He actually performs better when he lifts heavy and it builds his confidence. Then I will go down that road with him. Maybe I'll manipulate a little bit to make sure we're not doing anything crazy before a big competition. But these high school kids today, day one, incoming freshmen, I feel like we had about 40 kids. Easily more than half of them could not do one push-up.
Not one.
And so not one.
Like when we talk about a push-up, let's define the standards, right? Arms locked, bringing the arms down, touching the chest, slight pause, and then driving back up to full extension.
Body's in a straight line.
Yep.
Okay. Your back is flat. Your head is up a little bit. So we see asses up in the air, belly sagging, hands out in front like you're falling down. And I said to them, hey guys, so I have these like different aspects to my coaching. Number one, I tell them my job is to protect you. How do I protect you? I get you stronger. We build muscle, body armor. I make you faster, tougher, build your confidence. So this is going to be a team effort. So if you're not doing your part in maybe extra calisthenics, eating the right way, sleeping, this puzzle will never get put together because you're holding on to your pieces of the puzzle. So I said to them, let's say you don't know anything about training and you've decided you're here, you're signing up for football. What do you know how to do? And the kid said push-ups. Do you need a strength coach to do push-ups? No. Then guys, guess what you're going to do? Push-ups later on today, push-ups before dinner, push-ups after dinner, push-ups at night. To do 100 push-ups a day is not odd for a high school kid. At least that's what I think you should be doing. The power of calisthenics is so underrated because so much of the bullshit online. They think they need to be running around cones. Today, the freshmen I taught them how to squat and how to do push-ups. And I told them, you will get great at push-ups when you're pissed off and sick and tired of being weak. Okay? You're going to have the strength actually has to start in your mind. So we did squats and push-ups, several sets. I think we started with 10, and then we did 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, pause squat so I could see the technique. And then we did dumbbell goblet squat with squat jump, but you get a partner. So I squat, you squat, we coach each other, we get low, elbows in. It's easy. We get to go up in weight. Then you do your 5 squat jumps. And then we did push-ups and curls, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2.
Sounds great.
And then we went outside and did 3 hill sprints. And the hill sprint takes, if you're like pretty fast, you're probably 5, maybe 6 seconds. If you're struggling, 8, 9, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds. We did it 3 times. So I said, all right, guys, it took you on average 8 seconds, 3 times. How long is that? They said 24 seconds. So I said, all right, let's just say 30 seconds. How long is a football game? About an hour. All right. So if you're playing quite a lot, you're going to be going 5 to 8 seconds, 20, 30, 40 times in a game. I said, we did 3, and some of you look like you're about to fucking die. And so, you know what? There's a lot going on there, John. Here's a couple things. You and I love to talk about parenting. If my son said to me that he's going to play football, then I'm going to be doing push-ups and sprints with him. You know, if I don't know anything about exercise, I'd be like, hey, listen, Johnny, you want to do football? You have to run and you have to do push-ups. Even if I don't know. Even Jim Wendler says, like, I don't care that you're a lineman in high school. You should be able to run a mile. You're a teenager. You should be fit enough to do that.
Sure.
And if you can't do 50 push-ups, how can I trust you? And when he says 50, I'm like, Jesus, like, I'm just looking for 10.
Yeah.
We interrupt this episode with a shameless self-promotion. Are you a field or court sport athlete looking to dominate the leaderboard? Let me introduce you to Field Strong. Take your inner athlete to the next level by exposing yourself to the advanced training techniques that contributed to my 10 years in the NFL. Unlock pinnacle performance and level up your athletic potential today. Head to powerathletehq.com/fieldstrong and claim your 7-day free trial. Now back to the show.
I'm pretty fortunate in that where, you know, when I take the kids to jiu-jitsu, the guys that I train, Victor and those guys are, you know, like my athletes. So when I take the kids to jits, they use a lot of the stuff that we do within our own training. Like they've taught them like dead bugs and a bunch of, you know, isometrics. And then they always have these kids do push-ups and then some air squats. And it's awesome to see the different variations of push-ups and my personal favorite is the kids that can't do push-ups. The whole time they're doing it, they're looking around to see who's looking at them, not necessarily looking to see how to do push-ups, but they know it's bad. And the one thing for my son Cash and also for Jamie, they can do push-ups because we practice it constantly. I'll be like, all right, show me 10. And they know that they have to come down, pause, and come back up into full extension. The typical girls where they bring their arms out and they splay like this and they go out at a 90. So They keep the elbows nice and tight. But they also learned all that stuff in gymnastics. You know, gymnastics taught them how to do push-ups. I mean, they know how to do all of these movements from gymnastics. That's why I always think if you're going to put your kid in something like, like athletic development-wise, drop them off at gymnastics. Take them there as long as the coach will take them. At some point, the coach is going to say, hey, stop bringing the kid. They're too tall. They're too old. Yes. And that happened for the girls right around 11, where all of a sudden they didn't want to do traveling team gymnastics, which is 5 days a week.
Crazy intense.
And so we went in there and I was like, do you have like a fitness kind of like 2-day-a-week thing? And he's like, no. That ended. Yeah, he's like, at this point, they got to go this way. That's why I went to go to find other stuff. But I really think that form, if you could take your kids to gymnastics, put them in a little bit of swimming, and then teach them some jiu-jitsu, I mean, there's really not better athletic development than just child development. And, you know, I know there's a lot of different people that are going to try to hack into it. You need to do this and this. Let them go play sports. Like, let them do these different things, that tumbling and all that. It's so important. But it's pretty interesting. Then when I take the kids to jits, they always get there a little bit early, and the kids like to kind of play on the mats. They're doing like hands, they'll do tumbling, and like, you know, the girls will do a bunch of back, you know, I don't know, like back handspring shit. Good. And they can all do it because they've been doing this since they were 2 years old.
And also they're not being programmed through this perfect warm up. And by the way, when you ask the gymnastics coach, hey, do you have like a modified program? He's like, go fuck yourself.
No. You know what they show up? The other thing too, which is interesting with the gymnastics, is they have a huge skill development piece. So when I would go watch the girls, and even Cash, I still take him 1 day a week. So he's at this week, he's at an all sports camp. So, 8 to 4. and then I'll pick him up at 4:00, and then we got to be at Jits by 4:30. And trying to like convince him in there. He's like, Dad, I'm tired. I'm like, just an hour. All I need is 50 minutes. Just go hard for 50. So I'll take him. But with the gymnastics stuff, there's a ton of skill development, and they're really smart about like, you can't develop skills with a high heart rate. So they'll like teach the kid the skill. They get them to execute. They get them to rest and recover. And they know that skill execution happens and learning happens with like a lower heart rate. Once they get done and they've taught it, then they send them over their little fitness stuff. And then it looks like a CrossFit workout. And then they blast.
They start banging out push-ups and V-ups and rope climbing, and they do the behind the hand dips, the hands on.
Yeah, and they do they do dips on the parallel bars, and they have all this like different body weight stuff that they do, but they do it in circuits, and they do that like at the end. They're like, okay, 15 minutes max rounds, go. And then they ride the kids and they do 15 minutes. I mean, and it's like tumbling and this and running. And I mean, it's great. And
you're right. I remember that. We, did I ever tell you that because my undergrad was in health and phys ed, we had to do a full semester of gymnastics. Did I ever tell you about that? My gymnastics instructor in college was a two-time All-American wrestler for the college. So that was a D3 school, but I still call him Mr. Gonzalez, still stay in touch. But the program was extremely hard. He said, fellas, he's like, gymnastics is rooted in strength. Yeah. And so before we did, all the tumbling, the dive rolls, the cartwheels, the round offs. That's how I actually implemented those learnings into training. It started as training wrestlers on the wrestling mats, but then football coaches would call me, hey, can you train my team? We have 90 kids, but we don't have equipment. You'll just be out on the grass. No problem. So Mr. Gonzalez would have us like hold the guy's ankles. Now you walk on your hands. Okay, you're strong enough. Instead of walking on your hands, you're going to do plyometric push-ups down the mat. On the parallel bars, you're going to walk on your hands, 10 dips, walk backwards, 10 dips. My early like warm-up was one of the exercises, hold yourself upright on the dip bar and do leg raises. Where did I learn that from? Mr. Gonzalez. And when we got to the point where he was teaching us the muscle up on the rings, he was just so like perfect. And I wanted to do that muscle up so badly. And I think out of like 24 or 25 guys, 2 guys could do the ring muscle up. I was able to do the bar muscle up. I could not do that ring muscle up. He knew I wanted to do it. And one day I was jumping up over and over and just not getting the false grip, not coming through. Yeah, you have to like go through it, the window, so to speak.
Yeah, and then you try to like smash your head through the window and all that.
Yes. He walks by and he doesn't say anything to me. He was like a very, he never raised his voice. He didn't say much, but his presence would like kind of put a little fear in you, and also you wanted to do better to make him proud, to maybe get a compliment from Mr. Gonzalez. So as he walks by, I show him my wrists are bleeding, and he says, get up again. He wasn't like, oh, go clean up your wrists, let's go wrap them up. He just says, get up. I think I was 19 when I was in that, because I got into college at age 17. So I was my junior in college. I'm 19 in the fall semester. And then I remember when I finally did the muscle up, we're like 2 months into gymnastics, and I do the muscle up. I finally get it. And then I can't get it, right? I get the muscle up once, then I'm unable to do it the next class. He goes, you don't want to do it anymore. He's like, you achieved what you wanted. It's in your head. Now you don't want it anymore. And I was like, that motherfucker.
He's like, you're probably, this is just a clearing away of the rubble of your cowardice. And you're like, oh, boom, let me give you this knife back to you.
Yeah. He just said these like things that would just fire you up. And I remember the wrestling program had been removed. And I said, Mr. Gonzalez, if you bring back the wrestling program here, I'm joining wrestling. I'm going to get back on the wrestling team. He's like, no. He's like, this college doesn't want a wrestling program. And that was those early days of Title IX. But I still utilize those movements that he taught me. And he learned all that through gymnastics. And what's interesting is a lot of the gymnastics instructors, because there weren't too many of them around in the 80s and 90s, were often Russian or European.
Yeah.
And they had a lot more knowledge of body weight training than we did as Americans. Still in the 80s, as people were still kind of saying like, oh, you'll build muscle and then you'll stop and it'll turn to fat, or you'll be muscle bound and slow. We were doing plyometrics on the crash mats, 30 seconds, where you would have to like jump and lift the knees. One of the hardest ones was going on the pommel horse, holding yourself up, lift your knees and put your legs in front of the horse, lift your knees, put your legs behind the horse. And so we did circuits like what your kids were doing. So it would be, you got to do 10 reps of walking across the parallel bars. Then you're going to do 10 pull-ups. Then you have to do 10 V-ups. Then you had to do your plyo push-ups across the mat. At the end of each gymnastics class twice a week, we did this 10 down to 1, 11 down to 1. And it was push-ups, V-ups, then sit back and scissor your legs over and under. So we did 10 of each, and he did it with us right in front. 9 of each, 8 of each, 7 of each, down to 1. Next class, we did 11, then 12 down to 1, 13. Can't remember what we worked up to. It was like 20-something down to 1. And he did it at the front of the class with us. And he said, I do this, I can't remember. He had 4 classes a day. He's like, I do this 4 times a day. And he always had this like calm way about him. Something about it, So I'm still like so respectful to what I learned from him. And that was the fall of 1995. I still remember it.
This episode of Power Athlete Radio is powered by Train Heroic, the most immersive strength training app experience on the market.
We've built our online training business by partnering with Train Heroic and helping us deliver all of our world-class training programs like Jack Street, Field Strong, and Grindstone. To learn which Power Athlete training program best suits your goals, head to powerathletehq.com/training.
And if you're a coach looking to build a business with the best tech and training, go to trainheroic.co/powerathletehq. And now back to the show.
Chris Summers,
Yes.
world-class gymnastics coach. The place that we originally took the girls when they were pretty young was down to Azarians. So he had won a gold medal in like the 50s and had this just gymnastic factory called Azarians Gymnastics. And a lot of girls, were super high level. So I would always bring my daughters early to watch the big girls. And, they were I think we started taking them, they were 2 and even 3, 4. We didn't move until they were 5, almost 6 years old. So we would take them down there and just take them early to watch the big girls. I mean, when I mean big girls, the older girls train. And the intensity and the volume and just the dedication of those girls. I mean, those girls were there to be champions and try to, make the Olympics. It was fucking impressive. I just remember when we owned a CrossFit gym, we had some girls come that had been former gymnasts, and they were like, this CrossFit stuff's so easy compared to what we did in gymnastics. So when I had the ability, when I take the girls down, I'd watch these girls train. I'd be like, oh, I get it now. Now I know why all these gymnastics girls get into CrossFit. And they're like, this seems great. This is so much easier than I did when I was 10 years old in terms of training.
That's what some of the wrestlers are saying about MMA, like the former D1 wrestlers. Like there's a guy from Penn State, Bo Nickel. And actually he's from Texas, Allen, Texas.
Yeah,
he's like, this is so easy.
Well, I don't know if it's so easy.
Right, I don't think it's so easy.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you got somebody punching you in the face. But the problem is, why wrestlers are so dominant is just the work ethic aspect of it. I did not wrestle in high school, and that's a huge regret of mine. Now that I'm doing jits and I'm training with Matt, who Matt and I trained this morning at 6 a.m. and he's like, Even-Esh is texting me jerky boy links. And so it was.
You have to give context for that.
Yeah. So my training partner Matt's a former Division I wrestler, and now he comes over and trains. And I hooked him up with Zach because as a former wrestler, and then Matt coaches wrestling. I figured he and Zach would connect, and of course they have.
Oh yeah.
A bunch of weirdo former wrestlers that are like super excited about a bunch of dorky stuff, but he. The nature of wrestling in terms of like the competitiveness and just the go. I don't think that hurts you in any sport. So one of my regrets, because when history teacher, Coach House, was the wrestling coach. And I remember he was like, hey, Wellborn, you got to wrestle. And then when I talked to like the other coaches about it, like, you can't wrestle, you're going to lose weight. And at that time we were like treating weight like it was like for every pound that I weighed more, it was worth like a pound of gold. And I had this theory that like if I lost weight, I was never this. And now that I think about it, I'm like, man, I know how to gain and lose weight, dude. This shouldn't be. This shouldn't have been a real thing when I was 14, 15 years old, 16 years old.
The misconception is every wrestler has to cut weight. A lot of these wrestlers, when they cut weight, they do it by choice. And I remember one of the guys I trained from high school out of the house, then trained him out of the first warehouse. He said, look, I question your preparation. If you're always cutting weight, he said, who are you ducking? Why are you afraid to just be strong and wrestle the weight that you fall at? And no matter what, these kids are still cutting weight. Not this year, the previous year, one of the kids, I'd watch him during lunch, and it's called like advisory. It's like a prep period. I'm in the weight room. One time he ran 7 miles. I said, bro, are you on the cross country team? You don't eat lunch. You're fucking running 5 to 7 miles before every match. And he also didn't really do much strength training. He's always like, I got to wrestle. And I told him, your plan, it doesn't work because you're not placing in states. I'm not trying to fabricate a plan to benefit myself. I've seen what works. I've trained kids that have won state titles, national titles at the Division I level. I didn't build them, but at the high school level, I trained a lot of kids who didn't even qualify for states. And then they strength trained with us 3 days a week and went to a wrestling club 2 to 3 days a week. That's the formula. And they got better. Today, wrestlers and athletes in general, they're going to too many coaches, and I'm not really coming across very impressive athletes unless some of them they're just like genetic freaks. But I've found kids are just, or I'd say the parents kind of make the decision. Too much program hopping. Now that there's so many strength coaches out, you can't, Jim Kielbaso, he runs IYCA. You guys had him on a while ago.
I spoke at the IYCA conference in Detroit a couple years ago.
The recent one?
No, it was a couple years ago. Yeah, he flew me out there, and I spoke.
That's great.
I think I did their
keynote. I was part of the first pilot certification in Chicago. He wasn't with it. It was Brian Grasso. But going back to that, he's like on somebody's podcast, and he said, look, it's hard to sell like just being great at the fundamentals, at the basics. It doesn't look like anything amazing. And so coaches are starting to do crazy things because it attracts people. And I got to tell you, like running a business, it's like, oh, okay, what are we going to share on Instagram? Us squatting deep? People are going to be like, oh, that's bad for the back. I don't want my kid to do that.
Yeah.
And we still get like parents coming telling me they want core strength and speed and agility from a kid who can't do a push-up or a pull-up. So they don't have an understanding of really what is required to perform better in sports. And we need, you guys had Jim Kiertzy on the podcast long ago. He doesn't like to fuck up his last name.
Kiertzy.
What did he say? Brilliance with the basics. And then Rudy, when you guys did a podcast with him years ago, he equated it, interestingly enough, in a military setting, saying, I don't need all these fancy weapons to do my job. He said brilliance with the basics. Jim said simple things done savagely well. But it was interesting that Rudy, paralleled talking about special forces in the military. Like, he's like, when we were in Force Recon, we didn't have all of the weapons of today. He's like, and we didn't need it. We were getting the job done with the most, basic firearms. And I thought that was interesting. And I had this conversation with Bert with regards to the early days of Sornex. He said, in the 90s, just like you trained with George Zangus, he's like, a lot of these great strength coaches were just some local guy in the neighborhood with a squat rack in his garage, teaching cleans and squats and sprinting and jumping. And now it's like, God forbid, you don't have some crazy jump, this, that, and oh, you're only squatting, you're not developing the athlete. And it's like we are a piece of the puzzle. And the other piece of the puzzle is this flourishing business model of travel baseball, travel hockey, travel this, travel that. And so the father and or the mom, usually it's the dad making the sport decisions, has to get to a point and say, listen, I need my son to train. I'm, having a conversation with a local dad. He's constantly like, I want to bring him to you, but he's got this at that night. And then I'm afraid it's going to interfere. I want to bring him to you. And I said, listen, I'm not going to train your son because you want me to work around 50 fucking things. I'm not even going to be able to train him because you're so worried that he's going to sweat a little and be tired. Yeah. But your son is doing a 8-hour sport camp and going to JiuJitsu. And it's like, I remember
he just turned 7, and then I pick him up and make sure there's something to eat in the car. Everything's good. He gets there.
Perfect.
And he, and it's like, I don't know, dude. It's, kids are they're not as fragile as we think.
Correct.
So, but I don't know, dude. Like at the end of the day, it's got to be fun.
Yes.
I played football for a long time, past when it was fun. I remember when playing sports used to be fun, and then I remember what it looked like as a job. So the training aspect has to be fun, and lifting weights and being bigger and stronger and more jacked is like the greatest form of fun. I knew I was on the right track with my jits fighters when one of their girlfriends is like, I don't know what you guys are doing over there, but they keep constantly flexing on each other in the mirror. Like if they're anywhere, like I guess they went to dinner and like there was a mirror there and they all like pulled up and were like flexing on each other and stuff. And they were like, they're always like walking by, like, and I'm like, that's incredible. That's exactly what I want to hear. I remember when I started lifting weights and all of a sudden developed muscle, I was like, hold on. I got a tricep. Let me look at it.
I watch my son do it all the time now.
Dude,
every mirror.
My brother used to roll up his t-shirts like up like this. He would always do like I used to call them cereal boats. He would like make these little like cereal boats on his arms. Yeah. Like roll up his t-shirts for his arms to be bigger. And I used to joke with him. I'm like, you know what? When your arms are big, you don't have to roll up your sleeves. You know why? Because they're just so big that you can see them through it. They're stretched.
Yes.
But like we would legitimately roll up our sleeves. So my brother did it. I did it. And then like that was the cool part of like being young, starting to develop, getting in good shape and lifting weights. That's like the first piece. So one of the guy's girls told me that, and like it warmed my heart. And she's like, isn't that weird? I'm like, no, this is the best thing you could have told me. It means that we're on the right track. Like when all of a sudden, they are like teenagers, they're just, in their early 20s, but they didn't grow up in the same way. Like we started lifting weights 13, 14 years old. They didn't start lifting weights until they were in their early 20s. But like that first maturation where now all of a sudden I can see my muscles and I'm proud of them. Like that's the most amazing thing for these kids is where now all of a sudden they're starting to feel strong, they're starting to look strong, and they're noticing a change in themselves. That to me is
the ultimate transfer of training.
Oh my God, it is. I mean,
and the experts never talk about confidence as a transfer of training. Dude. They're like, does that exercise carry over? I don't know what curls do in sport, but if I build that kid's confidence, that is an added arsenal.
I can tell you exactly what curls do for sports. One, they fill out your shirt and your jersey. So when you're standing on out in the huddle, your arms are filling. You're not like flapping in the wind. And on top of it, like big, thick biceps, good punch, all that, like all of this like thickness comes from curls. So anybody that believes that curls don't fit into a strength and performance program, one is either never played at a high level or even any level, and two has never done any legitimate strength training. So I see a lot of this stuff posted, and it's just like, I don't know if these people have ever competed at a high level or ever taken somebody on the journey to a high level, but they get pretty good Instagram.
I was going to say, or they're just like, how can I post something that engages people? So I like ran like a joke on Twitter. I was like, if you're a strength coach, make sure you always talk about like a polarizing post. So here would be a polarizing post. Like if you back squat, you will die in the next 3 weeks. Or if you don't, do sprints, you will burn in hell. Back squats are the devil. I
think sprinting. I think sprinting is one of the, like, you think about like one of the most primal things, one of the most basic fundamental patterns, right? Like we crawl, we stand, we walk. I mean, fundamental patterns. And then like that ability to sprint and vertical displacement, getting out there and doing it is so fundamental to our existence. And the fact that like we have to go teach sprinting, and it really comes down to a strength issue.
I view sprinting as a strength activity.
Well, it is, because it takes strength to eccentrically, like to, I guess, fall into the sprint, hold the position, be able to load into it. It takes a certain level of strength. And that's why, you do hill sprints, is because I think it was me or Jim Wendler. I've never seen anybody run uphill poorly, which is pretty observational.
Right. Well, I get to see them run poorly. What you get to see is, whoa, this person has not moved their body. They've never played manhunt or pick up basketball. So when I record our athletes, if I'm going to share something on Instagram for the high school strength and conditioning account, you could see like the faster athletes have a nice high knee lift. Their foot punches the ground. The kids that are weaker, who can't do squats and lunges, their feet almost look like they're gliding across the ground. But what I've noticed is, as we sprint frequently, it improves their squats and lunges and push-ups. So when I say strength, to me, that's an umbrella term. We understand that it's power and speed, and then all these other little divots, these like deviations of strength, endurance, power, endurance, speed, endurance. But sprinting is like, all right, if you're 14 and your technique is not, so perfect, and I didn't do all this stuff, you're not going to blow out your ACL. But as you get stronger, the body starts correcting itself. So we sprint on the regular outside. We don't do high volume, but we do it frequently. And I know Wendler said that. He's like, we're in Ohio, but we run year round. And, he says, look, why do we build that muscle too? You're winning when you get off the bus. If people didn't compete in high school as teenagers, that if you were playing football or wrestling, you were sizing up the opponent. And if they were jacked, you were like, damn, it's getting in my head. And so wrestlers weigh in their boxers, in their underwear. Or now, one of the kids that my son actually trains with, ironically, he's a real high-level wrestler. They wrestled together when they were younger, played baseball together. Now the one is just wrestling. My son does baseball, basketball, but they train together. And they don't train, quote-unquote, correctly or properly, but they train hard. And they're both getting strong and confident and tough. And so yesterday we had the first summer, not yesterday, this past weekend had the first summer baseball tournament. And my son, it was great to see him like smashing the ball and sprinting fast. And my wife's like, oh my God. And, in my mind, I'm like, now he squats deep, he squats heavy, he's training hard. And so to me, we understand why that's happening. Other people just think, oh, he got older, he got bigger. No, he earned that shit by putting a bar on his back, which I know for the Twitter verse coaches, he's going to burn in hell for back squatting. Like, God forbid, right? Like, back squats are the devil.
Do you think, you talked about polarizing posts. Do you think a lot of this is just a media capture, or is it really 100%. The fact that people are this ignorant? If you listen to the podcast and heard me talk about my training growing up, we would, we train with Zangus 3 days a week. We would leave there and we'd go to the gym. We would train at the high school because we had to train with our football team, which is kind of funny because I still get emails from parents that are like, hey, the training at my kid's high school isn't very good. We found him a coach. How do I talk to the coach about this? And my whole thing is like, don't. Just have him train extra. So we would go and we would, you're going to laugh at this. My training partners were a year older, and so they didn't have fifth period. So we would lift weights at lunch, and then I would have to leave to go to fifth period. And they rode me so hard about leaving that I went to my counselor, and I'm like, hey, how do I get rid of fifth period? And they were like, well, you can't. Story. So I ended up taking what's called zero period, which started at 7 a.m.
School.
Yeah, before school I would take a class. So I could basically go lift weights at lunch. Not basically. I would just go. We would smash our lunch and then go lift weights. Open the weight room. They gave us a key, and we would lift weights from lunch, 5th period, and then 6th period was football. We would go out do all of our conditioning, and then normally we would do all of our sprint and like kind of football specific first, and then go lift weights after. We would do all the lifting before, do the football stuff, come back in, do that, and then leave, and then go to 24-hour fitness. Like it was
a lot. Yeah,
dude, it was ridiculous. The amount of, it was like, our goal was to do 20 sets a day per body part. And we pretty much did that like every day. And
so when parents are like, oh, I'm afraid he's going to be overworked, I always say, but I go, do you remember growing up in the 80s? You know, you rode your bike 10 miles a day, every day, and you weren't worried about overtraining your legs. And sometimes I think, did I grow up in a bubble? Did you grew up in the 80s, you didn't fucking run all day? And so it's interesting, like some schools don't have a good coach running the weight room. The coach puts something up on the whiteboard and kids are squatting and doing death-defying 1-rep max benches. Yeah. And then you have other places where some of the high school strength coaches are better than many of the college strength coaches I've ever been around.
Side note, Keith Canton, who was the assistant strength coach at Baylor, a good friend of mine, he got hired.
He's in Texas
now. Down in Houston. Well, I think they hired him to try to get his son to come play football there because his son's a monster. I remember when I went out to Baylor, went to dinner, like his son was like, I remember his little boy, and then all of a sudden he like sends me this picture, and he's probably 6'2". His son's got to be 6'6", 6'7". He sends me this picture of this monster.
On Twitter.
His head is like a bucket, and I just started laughing, and I was like, oh my God, what happened to that little boy? He's like, we have no idea. And he's a pretty good tight end. And I was like, dude, he's probably going to go as a tight end. Just his size are going to put his hand in the dirt at some point. So Keith hit me up and he's like, hey, I'd like to bring him over if you could like teach him a few things. And I'm like, dude, I would be stoked.
That's amazing.
Anytime y'all want to drive up or I'll even come down. Like, I mean, if you give me an afternoon with a fairly athletic kid that wants to play football, I can teach him offensive line play. I can teach him how to punch. I can teach him how to set. Like it's, I got invited, his handle on Instagram's Big Duke. I think.
OL Masterminds.
Yeah.
Did you get invited?
Yeah. So
I love what they're doing.
I'm going up there to Dallas, July. I think it's 7th and 8th. It's a Friday, Saturday. So I'm going to go.
Is that their annual symposium?
Yeah, they have their mastermind symposium deal. So he invited me up, which is cool. I looked at the calendar and I was like, oh shit, I'll be here. I'll drive up. So I
love it.
Dude, I'm super stoked to see it. I don't know who else is going to be there, but I'm hoping it'll be some of the guys I played with. I know Willie Rope spoke last year, and then I just saw one that Mark Schlereth did. So I mean, I hung with Stink.
I love what they're doing.
Yeah,
I follow him.
Yeah,
it's cool.
I'm not in 100% agreement with all of his technique stuff, just because I did it a little bit different. I don't know exactly what they're doing for their training and whatnot, but like that just comes down to like small splitting of hairs. Like I was watching some of his technique stuff and like there's just little things that I do different, but also I'm not 6'8", 360-pound black dude. I'm a 6'6", 300-pound white dude. I'll show you exactly how to do this job. But it's a 6'6" with 300-pound white dude or 306-pound white dude.
Who's the guy who spoke last year is on the Eagles. He's got the weight room in his backyard, the barn. He's on
Lane Johnson? Was Lane there?
So Lane Johnson's backyard has the shed. And then he built like a kind of like a turf ramp. I think they hill sprint in his backyard or they push the prowler up the You go on YouTube and you just type in like Lane Johnson, like backyard gym.
It's kind of like Power Athlete HQ. Built a massive building, filled it with stuff, and I graded a whole hill in the back. So like where the building sits, I graded. Yeah, I mean I do enjoy going to a commercial gym and I do enjoy training around other people, but I really love having my own facility with my own stuff and having it set up in such a way.
That's how you really get strong. Is you need to create. You need. Like, for example, my son will come to the underground usually twice a week, and then him and his buddy, they train quite a lot at a local retro fitness. And the equipment that's in that gym is by a major company. You and I both know a major company tends to be commercial. And I went there once and I benched, and I was like, I didn't realize what kind of equipment I'd been on. The bench was very narrow, and I'm not really a big guy. Yeah. The bars, I don't even know what those bars were They were just shit. And no, you can't really, even though I'm training with my son, everybody's got their headphones in.
Yeah.
So you're missing that camaraderie. And adult men don't put their weights away. And it's like, yo, fuck are you doing, bro? You're like 35 years old. Put your weights away. They just leave shit everywhere. It's such a weird world that we're in, that adult men are like, you know what? Yeah, I put 3 plates on this chest support row. I don't need to take it off. You know, what if a woman is training? She got to fucking put her weights
3 plates.
Now?
Get that shit.
Yeah, I was about to say my son was like, Dad, don't say anything. It's embarrassing. So I told him, I said, Ethan, I was going to say something to a guy. We went there on a Friday. I've trained Friday mornings with him at 6 a.m. One time we went on a Friday night, and there was a guy. He was doing seated cable row. In between his set, he was like leaning on another machine, checking his phone. I see my son go to the cable row. The guy, while checking his phone, says, I'm still working there. And I said to him, I go, Ethan, I'm going to say something to that fucking guy. We're supposed to work in. Like, he wasn't doing anything. He's on his phone, and nobody could use the fucking machine. I was like, bro,
no,
he looked like he was maybe in his 40s, like old enough to realize.
Do you know what you say to those dudes? Because I used to do this too. You know, like if I was using something and somebody came over, I'd be like, hey, it's cool. You can work in. I just always tell them that. And be like, and then at that point, I feel like I have a little training partner. I'd be like, how many are you going to get?
Yes.
All right, you going to get 10? All right, I'm going to get 10. Let's do this.
That's right.
It's, I think there's a good camaraderie, but it's usually from people that are strong and lift weights. I remember last time I went to Gold's Gym, this had to be a couple years ago. I was just amazed at everybody, well, the music was awful. I personally think, I even went and asked the people, I'm like, can you change the music? And they're like, no, this is the sanctioned Spotify channel that we've paid for. And it was just it was dog shit. So I understand why people are wearing headsets.
Yeah,
but
the music is horrific.
The music's bad, but also I don't like wearing headsets because I just don't wear headphones in the gym. I would much rather bring around like a little speaker and like set it up and have it playing my music.
That's a great idea.
Which is actually what I was thinking. I was like, I might just bring like a portable little speaker and aim it at myself. But I just stopped going just because one, like, if you go at a prime time, like I think I was looking for like 65-pound dumbbells, and these dudes had like camped out like 6 sets of dumbbells. And I remember it was like, hey, what are you guys doing with all those dumbbells? And like, oh, we're doing a superset and a drop set. I'm like, can I work in? I need those 65s. And they were like, yeah, but you got to bring them right back. I'm like, no, I'm going to go on your bench. And I just laid down and started doing it with them. And I was like, what are you guys doing? I'll just jump in. And they were like, you know, and these kids were probably like between 17, 18, or 19. And what am I? I'm in my 40s. So I'm like, how much you got? Let's fucking go. So I always find, and then my other personal favorite is, hey, bro, can I get a spot? I'm always like, yeah, how many are we going to get? Like, that's always my question. How many are we going to get?
Maybe 3, maybe 5. What's this maybe shit? Fucking maybe.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that this younger generation doesn't understand. How many are you going to do here?
As many as I fucking can.
Maybe this, maybe that.
All of them.
Yes. Coach, should I add weight? Are you questioning if you could do it? Because if you are, we can't do it because you already fucking put it in your head that there's a chance it's not happening. I remember as a teenager when I would approach the squat bar, I already had visualized in my brain what I was going to do. And I'd pace up and down and I played it. I may have heard Tom Platz say the movie in your head.
Yeah. Like
you're visualizing that you've already done it. And so I try to teach kids that deeper, like the deeper meaning and the way to really train versus working out. And so when I give you options, hey, we're doing 3 to 6 reps. You're probably going to get like 3 sets of 6 and 2 sets of 3. When you choose a weight, you are absolutely committed. We're going to call that make the rep or die.
Yeah.
And I always say, I never saw so many people like drop a bar squatting until CrossFit came. It was like, I'm struggling. Let me just bail out on this. By the way, dude, I got a funny story.
All right. Well, I think where this came from, just to finish this thought, came a lot with the reps in reserve. So I thought that was a really interesting, I think it was Mike Tusher?
Tashir.
Created that kind of reps in reserve, RPE, like what you're going to expend. Mm-hmm. And so, if a 1RM, true 1RM is at 10, how it kind of bakes back. The problem is he was using it for accomplished powerlifters that knew what a 1RM is. Like, hey, if I squat 600 pounds and I'm grinding on this, like, I want you to work up to like an 8 RPE, which would be, pretty high intensity or pretty high effort. And he's like, maybe it's 500, maybe it's 550, whatever it looks like, but it's really like how close you were. And like, if a 10 is all out, then this is the 8 in this. Well, the problem is people started adapting this over, and I understood and thought the genius of it, but people that don't really lift heavy weights or know what their true 1RM don't really know what the perceived effort is.
It's
so
very,
this,
confusing. It's so broad.
I get it on our programs all the others. Like what's the RPE on this? And I'm like, well, I want you to squat 5 heavy reps, and if you can get 6, rack it, put more weight on it, give me 5. So the rate of expenditure, what I'm looking for is a 10, but I need you to give me 5 reps at like as fucking high as you can go. And I call them die on the sword sets, where like, if you can give me 6, dude, rack it, add more weight when you need 5. I would rather you're 4 than you're 6. And
interesting.
I
I like that. Like you're saying, I like an RPE for somebody who's experienced.
Yeah. I can get underneath the weight, and I'll tell you within a shed of a doubt how much more I have in it. I can get underneath. I mean, we squatted the other day, and we were doing transformer bar, high bar back squats, and I hit like a set of 8, and I could tell you exactly based on that 8 what my 1RM was. Just because I've done it so many times.
Yes.
Yeah, because I've done it a lot.
Yeah, you're so in tune, and I think when you're coaching, for me, I'm able to kind of go back and remember my younger years. And I'm also able to, with the experience of seeing 100+ athletes a day, knowing that if you push that RPE too much, they don't have the discipline and the technical know-how to maintain technique. So they will alter technique in a dangerous manner or an ineffective manner to complete it. So if they're benching, they maybe will stop touching their chest and they'll start bridging. And that's when I have to remind the kids, hey, if you're a great training partner and he's about to bridge or he's squirming, I want you to rack the weight immediately. And you as a training partner have to be the coach. And your next set, you're going to drop it about 25%. And what I've learned is that if you allow athletes to do too heavy, they'll constantly grind. And then they're just going to be slow.
Yeah.
So what I tell athletes for the most part is I want to minimize the amount of grinding that you're doing, like slow, barely moving, because at this age, that probably brings them to about 2 reps in the tank.
Yeah.
It keeps the technique really good. But on the flip side, at my school, we don't have any velocity tracking. So I can't, kind of put a like a governor on the speed or the weight. But sometimes there's what I call FIO. Like, you're going to figure it out. You might miss a rep. You might grind. But that's, to me, honestly, there's the beauty. That's a lot of beauty in training. I feel like training gets so perfect when you have all the technology, all the right stuff. And, John, you have said it so often. And as a competitive athlete, we all know that when you compete, shit does not go perfectly.
Yeah.
You're going to be fatigued. You're going to have a broken finger. Your back is going to get pulled. Something fucked up is going to happen. And so I want us to learn to be durable and gritty during those times of imperfection. And there's many, imperfection to me would be an umbrella term. There's many things that are imperfect. Like, for example, today in the weight room, I trained JV and varsity together. We're looking at about, 60 kids. What I do with these large groups is I have 2 blocks. I have like 3 exercises in the top, 3 in the bottom. The top block is usually the main lift, and it's like a contrast. So we're squatting, and it was squats followed by hurdle jumps into a short acceleration sprint. Then the third exercise is something like that's maybe supplemental, or I'm sneaking it in. So today it was push-up variations, sneaking in a little upper body work. So you're squatting for a triple, you're doing a hurdle jump variation into a sprint, and then you could do clapping push-ups, feet elevated push-ups, shoulder touch push-ups. Now the bottom block was kettlebell clean and press, reverse lunge, carry. If you started in the bottom, I told them, you're going to be lunging and carrying. You might think it's not good to do that unilateral work and then squat later. But I said, guys, if you recall last year and the past 2 to 3 years, your first 3 or 4 games, you're winning them in overtime. You're like scoring a touchdown with 10 seconds left. And I said, the reason why is you're able to be strong and explosive, even under a little bit of fatigue. So don't be like, oh, I'm upset I'm not squatting first. And I'm like, if you're upset that you're lunging and you're not on a bar, hey, prove me wrong. You could go lunge the 100-pound dumbbells.
Yeah.
So is it perfect that we're lunging one group before they squat? Maybe it's not the most optimal, but in sport, when competition is at its toughest and matches or competitive event is won by a point, nothing is perfect. And so I'm okay with that, not, organizing it so perfectly. When you have large groups, you have to make sure it could flow. You have to make sure these athletes stay focused. Maybe they should rest a little more, but when you have 60 kids and there's a little bit too much downtime,
gotta go.
they lose focus. They fuck around.
Yeah.
They skip sets. There's a lot of things that could go wrong with 60 boys in a room.
They get into like the optimal recovery time in between sets is like 2 to 4 minutes. I find that at like 2 to 4 minutes, even my fighters will start fucking around on their phones. So that's where I'm real big on like the PAP and the French contrast. Like, hey, we're going to do a lift. You're going to do this. You're going to do this, maybe 3 or 4 things, 90 seconds, 120 seconds. Let's go. Let's get back in the fight. Because too much sitting around is the death of you. Now, if you're training for pure hypertrophy and we're doing some bodybuilding and the whole deal, like I'll like set the sets and like pretty much like put the clock up and have a running clock. And I'll be like, this done. You're up at this time. And just keeping people on track. Because I find if you say 4 minutes on the rest, dude, people are they're like little kids, are going to get lost.
Correct.
If, you've got into, obviously some of the training issues, and I think what it comes down to is not managing the parent's expectation. So I know you're in this kind of interesting piece where, these parents want the best for their kids and they're listening to 50 different experts. Whereas I just kind of laugh and think my parents didn't know anything about this stuff. I just knew I wanted to be big and strong and lift weights. And we knew that lifting weights was associated with football and like this whole deal. And I asked my mom, she's like, I had no idea what you guys were doing. I just knew that you guys were out there doing stuff and I thought it was good. And my job was just to try to feed you. So as we get into this, you had an Instagram post yesterday showing bacon and eggs, or I think it was eggs and steak. And you brought up Vince Gironda, and you brought up the anabolic diet and Mauro de Pasquale, which I laughed.
Dr. Mauro.
Yeah, Dr. D. And it's funny that you brought that up because I felt like I'm probably the only person that commented on there that actually had like a specific intrinsic kind of personal knowledge of all this. But it was cool to see people chime in that had actually used this stuff at one point. And I still use it with our athletes. We push it out, and I'll probably change the name of what's called our keto protocol. One of our nutrition templates. It's basically my version of carb cycling based on Mauro's anabolic diet. So I remember Luke wanted to call it keto to kind of capitalize or to capitalize on the
popular.
Yeah. And I'm always like, so I got to just go and change it. And we'll go back to carb cycling. And that was in part of one of my talks on the CrossFit Football Nutrition. So much so the name of my talk was called Earn Your Carbs. And then Ryan Fisher started this whole Earn Your Carbs cycling challenge. Yeah.
He just dropped his name.
Yeah.
So somebody posted on Twitter or maybe somewhere else, how we were mentioning the polarizing comments?
Yeah.
He made, I think, a video that said, never bench press again. And then somebody that's following his online program said, why would he say that? I'm on his program. We bench press all the time.
Yeah.
And so he commented, well, I didn't really mean to say that, and I have to say it for the views. And that's where it bothers me that the industry is going there, because he utilizes it.
Yeah. Well, he's just doing it for the clicks. He's just doing it for the gram.
I can't do that shit. I'm so sick of that. That to me, I fucking hate it, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan. Like I dig Ryan. I like him a lot as a person and as a coach and a trainer. But he is, kind of in this.
He understands the business,
dude. He does, and he does great at it. And it's a lot of clickbait. And I laugh that his girl Zoe, he found a girl that was shorter than him. I call them the muscle hamsters. And they're just like little tiny jacked people. I mean, she's probably like 5 feet and like he's like 5'5", and they're just like shirts off, jacked in the gym training. And he's got good content and he pushes a ton of it. He's in that kind of, what is it? Alex Hormozi, yeah. Hormozi. He's in that same, they're buddies. He figures out that, you got to push 5 pieces of content a day and it's, over the 25 a week and looks like 100 pieces of content, and they do a good job of pushing content because in like the way the algorithms work and people's, ability to discern information, they're going to tend to believe. The
consumer is who created this.
Well, the problem is the consumer is so uneducated that they basically dumb, like, I'll just take a step back to things my father said, which I should do an entire podcast based upon things my dad said. But my dad used to refer to the TV as the idiot box. And my uncle,
heard that before.
My uncle Tom, was, my dad, a little bit older. My Uncle Tommy was younger, and he said my Uncle Tommy used to watch a lot of TV, and he used to call him TV Tom. And my dad believed that anybody who watches the idiot box becomes dumb as fuck. And he used to joke, he's like, your Uncle Tommy watched way too much TV. He's a fucking dipshit. And I was like, Dad. And he's like, you got to watch the idiot box. And so when we were kids growing up, like we watched very few, like just not a lot of TV, even though we would like get up and, like back in the day on Sundays, there was like Sunday morning cartoons and we get up and we watch some cartoons. But then all of a sudden at like 8:30 a.m., that shit ended. And then it was like religious programs. So like we watched like, I remember in the summer, when my dad, obviously my dad would go to work and we were at home, we got to watch like Chips and Emergency. And that was
Dukes
like
of Hazzard.
Well, I remember it was Chips, it was Emergency, which was like Tom DeSoto and Roy Gage, and they were firefighters or paramedics. And then after that, there was Chips, and that was it. And then we'd go out and so we had our like little block in the summer. We got to watch TV, and then we went outside. Yep. But the idiot box, and like I laugh to think now with Netflix and streaming and all this information, I'll constantly tell my kids like little stories, right? Like last night we were driving home, went to Costco with my daughter, and we were we're listening to music in the car, and I can see she has her earbuds on. I'm like, what are you listening to? She's like, oh, I'm listening to my playlist. I'm like, it's hot garbage. Let me see what it is. And so we started going through, and I was like, take your AirPods out. I want you to like start playing her songs and seeing if she knew the band. We started with like Rolling Stones, Paint It Black. And she's like, I've never heard this before. And I was like, you don't know who the Rolling Stones is? So then we started playing Led Zeppelin. And she knew the Led Zeppelin, Battle of Evermore, and some of that other stuff from the Marvel movies. She's like, oh yeah, everybody's heard this. This is pretty new, right? I'm like, well, if 1972 is new, or 1970. So then we got into, and she's like, well, what was your favorite band when you were my age? I'm like, 1986, Metallica's Master of Puppets came out. Oh, God. I was 10 years old.
Friggin' cassette tape that was.
Oh, I was 10 years old, and this is what we listened to. So I started playing her that, and she's like, oh, I've heard you play this before. I'm like, yeah, I still listen to the same music that I listened to when I was your age. We used to ride our bikes or skateboard down to this place, and they used to sell used CDs and records. And we could go in there and you would like buy a CD or a record, and then you could go in and like listen to it and trade it in. And we kind of had this whole thing where we were constantly searching for like new music. And we would go and like you could actually, they had like a cassette thing where you could go put it in, and kind of like if the stuff was used, you could listen to it to make sure it was okay. So we would go down to this place and listen to music. And this is how we found. I'm like, there was no internet. We'd listen to the radio. And if you heard a song you liked, you'd go down and try to find it. And she's like, you guys are so old. And goes through all this stuff. And she's like, I can't believe it. I'm like, there was no streaming and this. And just to go back on this idea of the idiot box, my dad believed that the more TV you watch, the dumber you are. And his comment to me, and this was years ago, at some point, people will watch TV and not read books anymore. And when that happens, that's like the ending of humanity. So,
well, Mr. Wellborn was correct. I made I have a guy that'll come and film for me in spurts, and we'll put out YouTube videos and then put them on Instagram Shorts. Well, people went fucking ballistic on me because I said that the smartphone is when I realized the decline in the strength of athletes, and they were so fucking mad in the comments.
Why?
And I don't try to anger people.
What was their reasoning? What was their reasoning for why was the strength the smartphone?
My reasoning was that it distracted athletes from going outside and running and playing, and they would only do stuff if a coach told them. And I said, listen, I'm not making it up. I started training athletes in like '02 or '01 in my backyard. Once the smartphone took off, especially the iPhone, not the BlackBerry, but the iPhone, which was around 2010, 2012, I just noticed like all of a sudden the athletes were coming in, had this dramatic decline in basic strength. I always say when I trained kids early days, I would warm them up and it would be squat, lunge, push up, pull up, jog up the street. All of a sudden we're getting kids that can't squat. We're getting kids that can't do push ups. Kids, they had low muscle tone, and they were mad that I made this video. And the bottom line is they came home and just sat on their phone. Now it's not odd. You'll tell a kid, listen, when you go home, I need you to eat. And they don't even eat. They come home, sit on their phone. They wait for dinner. They are distracted by their phone. And, your father making that note of like, we're going to stop reading books. Even with all the information so easily and readily available, people are still misinformed and confused about how to eat and how to train and just basic stuff. Because I think what pulls you in on anything on your phone is always some sort of like shocking.
Well, it's because
videos.
They have to say something polarizing to catch to be able to fish you out of this tank. We did a podcast recently, and I kind of recounted some of these things, and I'm so glad that whatever impacts happened in my brain, that there were certain nuggets that got erased, probably like, getting yelled at and sitting through meetings. But a lot of the rubble's cleared away, and I remember a lot of the gems. And I discussed going on my recruiting trip to Cal and sitting with a guy named Adrian Cragen, who was dean of the law school, and he was kind of the guy that talked to me about being an attorney. He made an interesting point to me when he recommended I be a rhetoric major. You need to learn to read and write to the best of your ability. Until you learn to read and write, you will never learn to think. And he said intelligent people learn to read and write, and then they learn to think. That's like the process. Only idiots learn to think by committee and by listening and this. Like, you have to learn to read and write. So that when you read, you digest information. When you write that information and you think through your thoughts, this is how you do it. I mean, this is how Jordan Peterson's done it. That's why, I think he's one of the most thoughtful, interesting thinkers of our generation. And, he reads and he writes and he thinks, and then he presents his information. And if somebody asks him a question and he hasn't read and he doesn't know about it, he doesn't answer it. And he says, he's very nice, I haven't thought about that enough.
Yes.
And then when he does speak on something, he's thought through it so far that his depth is, Mariana's Trench. Because one, he knows he's going to be battled on everything. So he has to make sure his argument is bulletproof and is deep. So I think what happens.
I like that.
So I believe what's happening in our present day society is people are just digesting other people's content.
Well, they're just consuming without
and
thinking.
And they're referring to it as research, because you hear people all the time like, you haven't done your research. And I'm like, watching YouTube videos is not research. Reading a blog is not research. I know, because I've read fucking volumes of research, and you're going through, and I'm not just talking about reading the abstract or the conclusion, going through the research, understanding how it is, figuring something out, trying something, testing something, using it, seeing if it has the same results, and then at that point discussing it. The amount of things that I've used in training that we've never discussed, and the amount of stuff that we've used in training that we have, is like monumentally different. I've had ideas, there's things I've wanted, and I haven't seen dividends. And the things that we tend to promote and I tend to talk about are things that we've had an idea, we've listened to it, we've seen it, we've researched it, we've looked at it in depth. But I mean, it's we're in an interesting time where somehow people think digesting other people's content is knowledge.
They're not digesting it. They're just, think about it, John, looking at a phone, swipe, swipe, swipe. Look, I work in a high school, so I even see what looking at the phone is doing to their whole neck and back posture. Here's something that just hit me while you spoke about reading and writing. And just I'll put it in kind of the world of strength coaches. So I'm surrounded by books on the bookshelf, on the desk. I've got 2 guys interning right now. Every week they have to write, they have a different project. You're going to write a 2-week mini cycle for a middle school kid. You're going to write a 2-week mini cycle for a high school athlete, a 2-sport athlete who's in with us for 30 days. They're not typing it up. They have a notebook. And I said, you're going to write it because it forces you to think. And if I may have even heard you mention that, I don't even know where I came up with the idea, but I'm trying to pull them away from the computer. The other thing, you mentioned, by the way, I just finished a new book that when I get the extra copies, I'm going to send you one. It's a blend of fiction and nonfiction. But, I have the anabolic diet book printed out there. When I get something in PDF, I send it to a print company.
Yeah.
Because I can take notes on it. I'm not just being
I'll send you this. So I got Morrow's podcast that we had done. It was episode 58, I think. Like, it was long ago. But Morrow kind of fell off the face of the planet, and he's not even in the strength conditioning. He's like, I think he owns hotels now. So he kind of, he just kind of like smoke bombed and disappeared. And our podcast might be one of the last ones he ever did. He might be the only podcast, but obviously there's interviews. But I actually sent it out, had it transcribed, and had put it into like text, and have been going through and editing it and like pulling it out and trying to almost make maybe a lead magnet or a PDF or just maybe an ebook based upon that conversation and then the stuff. And then I've gone back and added some of my own that I remember that I've used, and obviously we use this many times. But I mean, the fact that Morrow's anabolic diet, really the father of carb cycling, has been ripped off, stolen, repurposed, and people just claim that it's their own, and you see it everywhere. I mean, it was lean gains and this, and I mean, it was just these amount of people that have done it. What they are missing was those original conversations, and when I talked to Morrow about how to do this, what he wanted me to do, the point in my life where I was 23 years old, I was coming off of this injury, I was kind of lunchy, like most offensive linemen. We were trying to eat like 600 grams of carbohydrates a day, putting on all this body weight, not realizing that the more body fat I carry, the less carbohydrates I can handle personally. This is what I've seen for a lot of people. The leaner you are, the more carbohydrates. Like, I could eat double the carbohydrates and stay lean if I was 10, 11, 12%, opposed from 20%. We've seen this with people. You come in, you're 30%. Like how I partition, protein's always constant. I'll give you less carb, more fat. And as I can kind of lean you out, the more the more muscle you carry in relation to body fat, the more carbohydrates you can handle.
Yeah, I've heard you say this before.
Muscle's extremely insulin sensitive. Fat's oxidative. So the less fat, more muscle, the more carbohydrates I can handle. It's why when you looked at those pro bodybuilders from like the 70s and the 80s, Tom Incledon and I had a cool conversation. He's like, you know what? I don't know what happened. But back in the day in the bodybuilding magazines, it was nothing for a guy to eat 800, 900, 1,000 grams of carbohydrates. And I'm like, what do you think it was? And Tom was like, I was like, is the food different?
They were ripped.
So Tom thinks the lack of nutrient density has changed, obviously, dramatically.
Yes, definitely the food is different.
Yeah, he said the food is different. He also thinks that a lot of the gluten allergy and a lot of the stuff that we're seeing is associated with glycophosphate and some of the other chemicals. He's like, it's not that. I don't think that people, because you hear people all the time like, oh, this gluten allergy thing's bullshit. How come everybody's got gluten allergy? Well, they think it's that there's some chemical changes or something. So Tom's deal was always like, think about even when we were kids, my brother and I still laugh about this. We used to sit down and eat half a box of grape nuts, like the big one, not the little one, the one we used to get from Costco.
Cereal.
There was like 450 grams of carbohydrates and then we would put non-fat milk on top of it with a banana. So you're talking like maybe 500 grams of carbohydrate just for breakfast as kids. And he goes, and then obviously we'd eat meat and the whole deal. He's like, we all ate high carb diets. And he's like, it's so interesting today. So I don't know if the food's changed or what, but
it's changed. And I know Tom had that discussion with you about like the chemicals in the air from pollution. He's like, even if you're a farmer in the middle of nowhere of whatever, Idaho, he's like, the chemicals are in the air and it's in our soil.
Yep.
And so it's it's changed everything. But
that's why I keep talking about my wife about these different blue zones around the world. So
there's one in the Greece.
Yeah, there's
Greece.
It's in
Italy or Greece.
It's in Italy. It's one of the islands in Italy. It has one there, the Goya kind of peninsula down in Costa Rica we went to last year. And as I was down there, I realized exactly why it's a blue zone. The food was incredible. Like everywhere we went, everything's locally sourced. I mean, it was pretty neat. I keep telling my wife, I'm like, we need to find one of these blue zones. There's also one, I think there's one in northern Turkey where, these people live to be, I mean, so like they have women in their 60s and 70s that have had children, which is pretty wild.
That's insane. We're starting to, in America, we're seeing a lot of women having babies in their 40s. I'm not sure if I don't even know.
Well, so 30 years ago, if you had a child in your like mid 30s, that was called a geriatric pregnancy, and they've since changed all that deal. But just the optimal time for women and for men. A lot of the problems we're seeing today are associated with men having children much later. The optimal time is the youngest you are. I mean, think about, you've had kids. If I had kids in my early 20s, I didn't need to sleep in my 20s. I would have been fine. All of a sudden you're like in your 30s and your 40s having kids. Dude, you miss one night of sleep and you're like, oh my God, what happened? Like, I've been wearing a whoop band. I was contracted to work with this group called Drake's Fury. And these guys are trying to paddle from Antarctica to Chile across Drake's Passage, 645 miles. So we've been doing a bunch of training, and so Whoop is one of the sponsors, so I'm not wearing it right now, but I'm wearing a Whoop band, so I've been tracking HRV and all this stuff. And it's pretty interesting to see if I go to bed at like 9 o'clock versus 11 o'clock, where whatever time I go to bed, I still wake up at the same time. It's always around 5:30, 5:45. It's just how it happens. So if I go to bed at 9,
I know that feeling.
I wake up at like 5:30, 5:45. If I go to bed at 11, I wake up at 5:30, 5:45. It's it's to the point where I've been praying to find a way to sleep in. And I just don't think I can sleep in anymore.
I thought I was going to sleep in, what's today? Wednesday? So my son is finishing 8th grade. Oh no, today is Tuesday, my bad. Tomorrow he finishes 8th grade. Yesterday, all the 8th graders went to the beach to watch sunrise. He didn't set his alarm. I wake up at 4:45. I'm like, Ethan, I think you gotta aren't you going to watch sun? Yeah. He's like, oh, I forgot I didn't set my alarm. I'm like, thank God. And I was exhausted because I was in Staten Island all weekend at a baseball tournament, and I was like, Monday, I'm not coaching anybody. I'm gonna sleep in. I fucking woke up at 4:45.
Dude, it's the weirdest thing. Whatever time I go to bed now, I wake up, and the problem is so I start tracking all this HRV. It's pretty amazing. So I don't know, I got to dig into more of this stuff, but I have this weird Wolverine effect where I can actually, and it says to me, you got way less sleep than you weren't, but for some reason you're 90% recovered. So I can do that for a few days and then all of a sudden it crashes. But it's pretty interesting to see that there's direct correlation between how much you sleep and what your HRV is. What's even more amazing is my kids. This blows my mind. The other day, I did not go wake them up and I wanted to see how long they slept. Dude, I went up there at 11 o'clock and they were still zonked out. At 7 a.m., my parents would have been kicking in the doors, calling us lazy fucks and get up.
We
you gotta
know
do this.
Different though.
Yeah, and I know that. I'm like, dude, if they're this tired, and I know they don't have their phones, I know they don't have their computers. Mm-hmm. I keep all that downstairs. There's no tech upstairs, so I know that they're legitimately sleeping. And I go up there and knock on the door, and they're like, "What's going on?" And I'm like, I haven't slept like this ever. If we could somehow figure out what that is, and I talked to Parsley. I'm like, hey, Parsley, if I could, could we figure out what this is and basically bottle this? He's like, yeah, it's called youth. And I'm like, yeah, dude, can we find that? Is there a peptide that gives us this?
My wife is real dialed in with this. If she starts noticing that my kids are getting cranky, they're exhausted, they're going to come down with something, she will let them know that they are not they're not going to school on time tomorrow. You're sleeping in. And it boosts their immunity. It's just like this recovery. And you're right, they could sleep till 12 noon, especially
I'm so
boys.
jealous. I'm so jealous.
So
Yeah.
she's dialed in with that. But I want to go back on that anabolic diet.
Oh,
So,
dude,
you know,
do you have any good anabolic diet stories?
oh yes.
Lay it on me. Let's hear them. Let's hear them.
So first off, you know, I came across Dr. Mar DiPasquale in the early 90s because I used to record and watch American Muscle Magazine, which is now you could find bootleg, you know, videos on YouTube. But he always had this like very short nutrition or vitamin segment. They would give him like less than 5 minutes. So you could find some of them on YouTube. And you know, he was talking about, he spoke, of course, about anabolic window, anabolic eating, phosphagen, all, you know, things that like in the early 90s, you're like, what the fuck's this guy talking about? Well, when I joined Diamond Gym in 94, I'm around bodybuilders, and the owner of the bodybuilding of the gym, you know, was from you know, he competed in the 60s and 70s. Vince Gironda had the steak and eggs diet.
Yeah.
So when I remember speaking to John Kemper, the owner, and Jason, one of the pro bodybuilders, we somehow came into a conversation of like, I'm not getting bigger and I'm not eating really any fat. So they're like, what? They're like, what do you eat when you're done training? I'm like, well, I go home and I have a protein shake, and then later on I eat, and pretty much my meals are chicken and rice, except for breakfast I do 8 egg whites, 1 yolk, and oatmeal. They're like, no. They're like, you need more. They're like, you need more fat. I'm like, I can't eat more fat. Don't have a 6-pack, I say to them. And at this time, I think I had already competed in bodybuilding. So I may have been 20 or like close to age 20. And so John says to me, Zach, you're going to have your meal replacement shake here at the gym. Then, so a meal replacement shake they were pretty new in the mid 90s. He's like, then you're going to go home.
Now you're dating yourself, basically calling meal replacements, which is metrics. Metrics was
Metrics, and then Lean Body came out by actually Myoplex, the guys from EAS.
Yeah.
But I drank Metarex, which was basically the flavor was cement.
It was so bad that if you smelled it, you were going to puke. So I used to plug my nose to drink it. Because
you had to mix that with 16 to 20 ounces of water,
and
or
it
would
was
not
sludge.
Yeah. And so
I used to put ice in it, and then I would basically put it in a blender. I'd pour it in with ice and water, and I would zip it in, and like you kept putting more and more water to get this pudding consistency gone, and then plug the nose and just pound it, and it was fucking the worst.
I remember that. So they said, and it was fucking expensive. I mean, you know, especially back then, you know, I'm a college kid. I think a box was costing me like $45. So John says to me, Zach, you're going to have your protein shake here because you have a 30-minute ride home. When you get home, I want you to have 2 spoons of peanut butter, and then I want you to grill a steak or fry up a steak. And then they said to me, what about, you know, your salads? Like, you having salad? I was like, no, you know, sometimes vegetables. They're like, where are you getting all your minerals from? Where's your sodium? They say to me, sodium. I go, salt, isn't that bad for you? They're like, dude, you're going to have a small salad every day. You're going to put a little olive oil and salt on it. And so now I'm having the protein meal replacement after, and I'm now having a high-fat meal when I get home. He said, before you shower, 2 spoons of peanut butter, have the steak and the small salad with olive oil and salt on it. I think I was hovering around 196, 198. And then in a very short time period, I think I was getting to like 206, 208. And I got this very thick, full look. And I was leaner. And people were like, are you getting ready for a bodybuilding show? And I'm like, no. Oh, also they said for breakfast, you're going to have your 8 eggs, but 4 of them are going to be whole eggs. So it didn't really hit to me that they were starting to push the high protein, high fat. Fast forward to 2007. I owned the Underground Strength Gym for about, open the first warehouse for about half a year. A buddy of mine is going to train at the gym next door. We competed against each other in the teenage jersey. except back then we weighed 175. Now he's 235, 240.
Wow.
I'm like, damn, what the fuck happened? You're huge and ripped. He's like, I'm on the anabolic diet. I'm like, what? Tell me about it. So he tells me that for breakfast, he eats 12 eggs, whole eggs, carton of eggs. For lunch, a pound of ground beef. And then for dinner, another 12 eggs. And then I see him, and by the way, he's strong as fuck. I have video footage of us training. He was doing barbell lunges forward. I'm about to say 4 plates, like what he was lunging, what I was squatting. He was fucking strong. A year later, he's now also doing strongman. So he's 275 with abs. And basically a dozen eggs in the morning, a dozen for dinner, and now he's like more than a pound of ground beef. I think he was splitting it up to like 4 meals a day. So that's my buddy Johnny Washishko. And I'm like, dude, I haven't heard about the anabolic diet since fucking, I don't know, 95, 96, and now it's 2007, 11 years later. So I don't know how he came across it, but I think the bodybuilders of the early 90s and prior had that information because it was shared in conversation. And I also have a magazine. I did a video on this. It was called the High Definition Diet. I believe it was from 1968. And so it was Strength and Health magazine, which Bob Hoffman owned, York Barbell. And the High Definition Diet was a spin-off of Vince Gironda's steak and eggs diet.
Yeah, Stone Age.
And it was, but also the whole milk. When you and I were kids, people were, the milkman was delivering milk.
Yeah,
okay?
And what's hilarious is we still drank skim milk.
Dude.
So
imagine.
But there was this weird thing, man. Like, and my dad subscribed to it. There was this idea that saturated fat was bad. And I remember I remember our neighbor, Barbara Culver, since passed away. She had this like fucking avocado tree that was probably 40 feet high. Like the thing was a fucking monster. So back in the day, they used to have, like in Palos Verdes where I grew up, everybody had septic. And then they basically brought in storm drains, and they made everybody pipe in.
Septic for the toilets.
So they had septic back in the day, and then they brought in storm drains, and they basically brought in, and they basically made everybody, when they built all the infrastructure, they piped everybody in. Well, most of the people didn't get rid of the septics, so they just left them underground. All right, they didn't dig them out. So what ended up happening with her, this avocado tree she planted, it pretty much piped into the septic between her and the neighbor. It was like right on the deal. So all of a sudden this like septic infused, and there was like, a couple septic tanks all in these corners. I guess it was like 4. The thing was like right there. It must have piped into all of them, and they never removed them. So this thing grew like, it was like the biggest avocado tree you've ever seen. And it used to spit out these avocados that were like the size of grapefruits. So she would get this huge thing drop, and she would come with brown paper bags, and she would just drop them off to the neighbors. So like periodically through the year, we would get these trash bags full of these avocados, and we would just crush them. And I remember my mom being like, "Oh, they have a ton of fat." I'm like, "But they're so good." And we used to eat a bunch of avocados. Well, the story goes when I was born, and I started, obviously, off of breast milk. And when my mom started introducing food, she just started feeding me avocados because I would eat them. And all of a sudden, she took me in. I was 6 months and weighed 30 pounds. So 30 pounds at 6 months. And there's a picture of me. I was born March 30th. There's a picture of me on Halloween. So it'd be October 30th, 6 months later. And I'm sitting next to my brother in this costume. And my brother and I are the same fucking size. And my mom always thought that it was the avocados that like made us so big. So that was kind of a joke. My mom's like, if you want to bulk your kid up, feed him avocados. But long story short, then my dad got into this like whole like low fat thing. And it's like, you got to have healthy grains, and saturated fat is bad. So we ate that way. That was
the thing.
It was the thing. And then when I went to college, that was still the thing. All of a sudden I go to the NFL, I meet Morrow, he sends me his book, and it's completely opposite of everything I've been taught. So what do? Let's fucking do it. All of a sudden I'm pouring olive oil on my steaks. I'm drinking olive oil by the shot. I'm eating, whole eggs. and this, and all of a sudden, like the body recomp, I went from a pretty lunchy 310, 312, 315 to like a pretty thick 326. And I remember I called Morrow and I'm like, I'm too big. I got to cut.
Too big. I remember you telling me.
Cuts me down to 306. I lost that 20 pounds. And I'm not kidding you. Like the physical kind of stature you see today was literally shaped when I was 23 years old, because I was still in this like high carb, moderate to low protein, and, cardio is bad because you're going to lose your game. I mean, there were so many misconceptions. I was recently, I was talking to somebody recently, and they were talking about like going to the NFL and being able to play for a long time. There's a bit of winning the genetic lottery. And, like how much training really goes into it. And I tell them, I got a chance to play 10 years. I did fucking everything wrong. The training we did was singles, doubles, and triples with Zengus. We trained multiple times a day. Like the amount of stupid training we did, if somebody had just focused us into like good training, because we didn't know what to do. We were ripping pages out of Flex magazine. We'd go over to Zengus, and he was a power lifter. So It was like singles, doubles, and triples, and there's a lot of great shit that we did, but we would leave Zengus's and go to 24 Hour Fitness and just do bodybuilding, Dorian Yates Flex magazine. I was sitting down. I was eating a massive amount of grape nuts and cereal, non-fat milk, bananas. For lunch, it was turkey sandwiches. And then, we would only really eat a ton of meat at dinner, but even then that shit was expensive. We ate a lot of hamburgers, so that was like a big deal, but buns and this. Ate a ton of white rice. So, as I go back, and I was laughing with my brother, he's like, dude, we ate a shit ton of carbs. And like, we were big as fuck. So the training was like ridiculous because we did way too much. It wasn't focused. We had zero adherence to diet because we weren't weighing and measuring. We were just eating till we were sick at every meal. We would go run. We didn't do any aerobic work. There was no zone 2. None of like building the aerobic base. We just went out and basically ate and sprinted and lifted weights. Like when I joke and I'm like, dude,
it's interesting that we don't want like linemen in high school. Don't run them more than this. Like, dude, we did fitness to recover.
So one of our speed workouts when I was in high school for my football coach, 16 220s. Run a 220. Jesus. So like basically run a half, walk a half, and you do that 16 times. So it was run a 220, walk a 220, 440 track. And that was like our Tuesday running. And that was our speed work. So like it was like the training was so bad. The diet was so bad. Like supplements were terrible. Like there was just.
This brings me like a couple things.
Right. So the crazy part about it was all of a sudden, we get to college. We're below the poverty line. Obviously, the training was pretty good with Todd Rice, and we still like the diet we were subscribing to. I just think that if I had access to the information I had today when I was 14 years old. And somebody that was like, no, this is exactly what you're going to do. Because, Zengus wasn't a performance coach. He was a powerlifting coach. He coached Thompson powerlifting team. He knew Bill Kazmaier. He was in supplements. Like he knew a ton of shit, but there was a lot of shit that he fucked up on. Like the fact that he had us wearing knee wraps. I wrapped my knees and he said over 225. So it was like belts and wraps every day. Dude, I developed patellar tendonitis and I'm like, I was like, hey, my knee's hurting. He's like, just wrap it tighter. Shit like that. Like it just.
I remember those wraps. I guess they were he made that marathon suit, but those wraps
were so tight.
Thick.
They were the double gold medal wraps. So not to shit on anything, but like he was doing the best he could and he was training these kids and the deal. But when I look back on the amount of mistakes that, because obviously, hindsight's 2020, right? So I'm looking back at like 14-year-old me going and buying Flex magazine and being like, Dorian Yates, Road to the Olympia, back routine. That's what we're going to do. Right. And we would take it in there. Yeah, we took it in there and like taped it into like a composition book. And like we were trying to like take notes and like, how many reps did I get? One set to fit. Like zero fucking guidance. And you know what? I did get a chance to go play in the NFL for 10 years. So what makes me think is, shit, what if, and a big part of what I did with CrossFit football, and I've done for Power Athlete, if you haven't figured this shit out, is what I'm trying to prevent is this, I'm trying to right the wrongs of the past. I'm trying to prevent the young 14-year-old John Wellborn who doesn't know what the fuck he's doing and is trying to do everything. I'm trying to give him direction so that I can go find the kid like me and be like, dude, just do this. You don't have to chase you, dude. You're going to be bigger and stronger. And I remember one time, I think I was, so when I started living with Zangus, I was, my freshman year, I was 6 foot, 165 pounds. That next year, I was like 6'2", like 200. And I was 14 or 15. And I remember I started training with George, and George told me, as I was like, like, how do I put on weight and this, and like just kind of asking all these questions. And he was like, you realize by the time you're like 20 years old, you're going to be 300 pounds. And I was like, there's no way I'll be 300 pounds. Like how? Like, I don't know. Like, and in my head, 300, like I just didn't have any perception of this. And
right.
like some of the older guys were like 245 and 250. And he's like, you're going to be like 6'5", 6'6", 300 pounds. And I'm like, you think I'm going to grow 4 more inches? And he's like, yes. So my older brother, Rob, is like close to 6'7", and he weighed 300 pounds. He's like, look how big your older brother Rob is. And look at, my brother Eddie's like 6'2 and a half, 6'3". He's like, your brother Eddie is the runt of the litter, and he's like 6'3". And he's like, dude,
this
trust
is
me.
genetics.
Yeah,
he's in front of the health class.
Yeah, he's like, you're going to be fine. Just like be consistent in this. And what I needed was something like Power Athlete and this podcast and, all the things that we've talked about to almost like tell these parents where it's like, dude, I know at like, 8, 10, 12 years old, you have visions of, oh, my kid's going to be a Major League Baseball player in this. And I'm like, dude, unless there's somebody lurking in your family line, kind of like Keith Canton's son. All of a sudden when he sends me that picture and that kid's head is a bucket and he's like 6'7", and I was like, yeah, it's pretty awesome.
I wonder if Keith's son is just like following the template, training with Keith. And what's interesting is you're like, I wish I had this for a dad to listen or a kid to listen. Today, one of the kids that came in, he's going to be a sophomore. He's one of the stronger, bigger kids. Not that fast though. He's like, my shoulder hurts. Okay, today's Tuesday. What did you do yesterday? Well, my shoulder hurts. So yesterday I did legs. All right. What about on the weekend? On the weekend, I did back and buys. The other day I did chest and tries. So here we are. Not that that's bad.
No,
but
it's not bad, but it's not
optimal.
Not bad, but
it's
not
correct.
Optimal.
And look, he could have been training with us. He opts to go to his own gym and do that. And then, you mentioned dads that want to do this. Our athletes now, they come, they go. They come, they go, because the dads are getting trapped up in the travel, and the practice needed with travel teams is now creating a world where the athletes can't get to strength and conditioning because they're driving, their parents are driving them. So when I told you about a dad who was mentioning one of his son, I was like, listen, I can't train your son. You're only going to be here for a month, but then during that month, like he's got this practice, that practice, and you're afraid he's tired. We can't even train. The other thing that hit my kind of brain while you're talking about the early nutrition. See, I'm like this is in front of my face every day, so I watch it unfold. Boys, I think we mentioned this in the last podcast, they have breasts, they have bellies. Barely any boys have abs. I'm not talking about a 6-pack, but like a nice 4-pack solid. Skipping breakfast or eating a fabricated protein bar.
I think it's diet, but it's also environmental. I really think that
Let's dig into that. What do you mean by environmental?
Well, I mean, so like there's a lot of, when you look, and this is, kind of a interesting one, and really Dr. Tom's the expert on this in terms of looking at like the environmental toxins in, whether it be in the air, within the soil, within the food, that are having a very estrogenic effect.
Yeah. And they're eating majority processed food.
Yeah. So, that's why for our kids, we cook, like we eat out one night a week. So we go to this place, Route 12 down the road, the kids can get like gluten-free pizza or wings. And like, we kind of just like a fun thing. We go on Thursdays and my wife and I can have our like one drink a week, which is our she's like, we're getting a margarita. I'm like, all right, fine. We go do one drink a week. But we go do, but for the most part, we cook everything. So I'm very fortunate to work with like Steak Classy Meats, and there's Augustus Ranch and some of these like badass places. So I buy everything and then we cook everything. And my wife's meticulous on this. But, you still have to, they're still kids, so you still have to have some like treats.
Correct.
Like popsicles is a big one now. So the girls are like, like go get them these, I don't know, super organic popsicles, or there's like a, certain ice cream or like some things just because they're kids and you can't be like a complete fucking weirdo with them.
Yes.
But for the most part, when my daughters went to school, or they went to school, the hilarious part is whatever we eat for dinner that night is their lunch the next day. So it's like, hey, if we're having steaks, if it's greens, like whatever it is, rice, like whatever the dinner is, like however it looks, I just make enough to basically partition and make their lunches.
Correct. You've been saying that for years, for hopefully those listening. So
for over a decade, we've done this since day one. So the hilarious part is,
when your kids were in elementary school, they were bringing steak for lunch.
Yeah. And so the teacher actually took a picture and sent it to my wife and was like, "Can you send extra for me?" Because she was like so jealous of the lunches. So my wife was like, "This is her deal." So whatever we're having for dinner, one of the kids said to my daughter, Jamie, "You guys must be rich because you eat steak and there's like chicken and meat and this for everyone." And she was like, "What are you talking about?" Because they eat like there's Lunchables and all this other shit in plastic. Like the BPAs and the plastic stuff is probably far the scariest piece to me.
Well, John, check this out. What's interesting that like a kid would say that, because teenagers said to me, "Well, what if we don't have the money, to get chicken, steak, rice?" So I said, "Guys, I just bought a bag of potatoes, and I think it was $6. Okay, I bought a bunch of chicken, and each thing of chicken was like $6-7. I buy my beef from a Mennonite farmer in Pennsylvania, but I said this food is actually less expensive than the junk that you guys are buying." So there's that. Even I think the adults think that the healthy food is more expensive. And I was telling you how my son is kind of like really into all the training. So this year he said, "Dad, I don't want you to make me sandwiches anymore. Pack me chicken and rice." And so we simply got I have thermos for my son and daughter. I cook in quantity, just like you do. Grilled chicken, different kinds of beef, steak, white rice, different potatoes. And I just heat it up in the morning and put it in their thermos. And before I had a thermos, my son was just getting it in a container. He didn't care that it was cold, but you could see the difference in his physique.
Oh, yeah.
That he's no longer having turkey sandwiches. But like you said, they're kids. Like a turkey sandwich, a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Yeah, like you got to have a mix. But
what about this too, John?
So
we mentioned milk. Milk now can have an expiration date of it's as of right now it's mid-June. You could buy milk that's expiring in August, 7 weeks from now.
We just stopped drinking milk.
Yeah, you told me. You're not even eating too many eggs, I think you mentioned to me.
I cut the eggs back. Like it's and this was kind of a random one. My older brother ended up getting some vitiligo, which is like the white splotches on the skin. Mm-hmm. And when they went and did a food allergy test, and he's allergic to shellfish and eggs, and he was eating like a ton of eggs.
Where's he live, in California?
Out in California, yeah. So I don't. I just kind of cut back on eating shellfish, and I just kind of cut the eggs back. But like I still will sit down. And so when I was, I think I've told you a story. When I was at the Eagles, we got a bod pod. And so everybody went in and got the bod pod done. So then we started betting. Like, okay, who can be the leanest, who's the fattest, and the whole deal. And we all put money into a pot. And so I went back to, I was up in Philly and was going back to Florida. For the last 6 weeks, and we come back third week of July for obviously training. And I knew I had about 6 weeks to fucking dial this thing in. So my diet, I did 3 pounds of ground beef a day of 90-10. And then it was a dozen eggs. And so what I'd do is I would cook 3 pounds, I'd cook a dozen eggs, and then it was 2 cups of rice. And I would put that all in a big pot, and then I would partition that into 4 meals.
Good. That's awesome.
Into 4 meals. So I would wake up and I would have a shake.
Eggs, beef, and rice.
Yeah, that was it, with salt. So I would wake up and I would have like a protein shake. It'd be like 75 grams of protein. And I was using, I think I was using Vitargo. So like 50 grams of Vitargo pre-training. And creatine or whatever.
Brand.
Yeah, that's Swedish waxy maize. I got a new one. It's called Yukon. I've been messing. So I would take that. I would jump in. I would wake up, jump in the car, drive over to training, slam that, and then we would train. And then I would bring my 2 meals. We would get done, and immediately after, I would crush my first meal. And then 90 minutes later, I would crush the second meal. And then I'd go home. I'd sleep. I'd crush the third meal. And then I would wake up And before, later at dinner, like 7, I'd have like meal number 4.
That midday nap
it's
is
huge.
Tremendous.
So
yes, after training.
Then when I came back, I was 306 pounds I think it was 7-8%. I was 282 pounds of lean muscle. At the time, I was the only dude over 300 pounds who'd ever tested under 10% body fat. And I was the most muscle mass they'd ever seen anybody carry was 282.
And how much the amount of food you consumed. And it's funny, like people mistake quantity of food. When I was bodybuilding, I ate 8 meals a day. I was eating a whole turkey every day. I remember
you cooked an entire turkey a day?
My mom did.
That's fucking awesome.
We went to, before it was Costco, remember it was called Price Club.
Yes.
And so they asked my mom.
So you're going to laugh at this.
Do you own a restaurant?
Dude, my grandfather used to call Price Club the $100 Club. Because he said that you couldn't leave Price Club without spending at least $100. I dropped $400 last night, and as I was walking out, I just started laughing, thinking of my granddad calling it the $100 Club, and now it's the $400.
I'm just going here I'm just going to go here and get a case of water. And you're like, what the fuck? And just bought $500 worth of shit.
But back in the day, you actually had to have a reseller's permit because it was only for like businesses and restaurants that were buying in quantity. So my dad the way we got in there was he used to have to write his company, from the law firm. So he used to buy it through the law firm.
Mike, I got to tell you, like we're jumping around with these topics. What hit me is like you saying like you want this information to hit the young athlete, the dad. I sometimes wonder, like, was I in a bubble until I got to the high school and I'm seeing 150 athletes on average each day and I'm seeing how they show up, what the physique looks like, what is the level of readiness. And I'm like, man, we're putting out all this information, but somehow somebody else and some other channels are bypassing our stuff because they're not showing up better.
Well, it's because what they're clicking into is the aesthetics piece. Like the 20-something-year-old dude who's hey, this is what I'm doing, but he's not because he's taking a bunch of drugs. Like the Joey aesthetic and these guys, and they're not clipping into the right stuff. And the problem is like I was watching one last night, because now that I'm going to it's so hilarious how the algorithm works. So Duke hits me up to go to his deal. I like RSVP'd, click through his stuff, and now I'm getting pushed a bunch of like offensive line, high school and college stuff. And there's all these like offensive line has become a huge business now for like these high schools and whatever. And they had all this O-line specific stuff, and they were showing like the top recruits of offensive line. Fuck, these kids look bad. They had one kid.
What do you mean they look bad skill-wise, or they look bad physically?
Well, like the one kid, they did like a 225 rep test. I think a kid's got like 8, 9, 10. One kid got like 24 reps, which is pretty good. He didn't lock a single one of them out, but he still did it. But like these kids are just like real, I don't know, just like there needs to be, I don't know, a little discussion on some of this, like they're putting these kids out there, and I know the NIL and that whole deal has them all thinking that they're all professional athletes. But I'll tell you, it seems like the more glitz, the more glamour, and the more information that, to really go back and, quote you, that like, kind of the old school, this kind of hard work, tough mentality stuff, it's just not sexy. It's not getting the clicks. I look between your stuff and, we're going to have Josh Bryan on the podcast down the road. He was,
I love Josh.
Yeah. I mean, he and Fred Hatfield were, he was kind of the heir apparent for Fred. And, I follow their stuff, and it's very consistent in terms of like, gas station ready. And, he was showing, a bunch of the old, WWE guys and, ravishing Rick Rude. And I mean, that speaks to you and I, cause we know, but for these kids, they don't know the difference. They don't know who these guys are. They just know that like, there's guys that kind of fit into a different demographic. I mean,
when you
seeing like the dude, seeing, ravishing Rick Rude and those guys step on in the wrestling deal on like Saturday, when we'd watch Sunday or Saturday morning, that deal, that made us want to go lift weights. Right, like those dudes were fucking jacked. They were
made you want to lift weights.
Well, dude, the WWE thing. What I was always amazed by is one, how good a shape some of those dudes were in, but also how athletic they were, and how they moved through space and the deal. And so for me, I always wanted to have this blend of like big, strong, and athletic. And I remember Louis Simmons being like, just because you're big and strong doesn't mean you're big and strong. And being big and strong doesn't mean athletic. And just because you're big and strong doesn't mean you fucking play football. And, and he went through this whole thing. He goes, if that was the case, all these fat fucking power lifters at Westside would be playing in the NFL. He's like, he goes, but because, and Louis was great with that. Even when I was rapping with Rip a little bit, people forget, like Rip takes a lot of fucking heat and there's a lot of haters, but you have to remember it's starting strength. It's the basics. Like he even said, he's like, people want it to be this like huge spectrum across, like we're specific into this market. And he's like, and when they run the linear progression and they're done and they want to go be athletes, they should come to people like you. If you're trying to use starting strength to fucking get a college scholarship, you're fucking misguided. Like it's starting strength. There needs to be an intermediate and advanced. And that looks like people like what you're doing at Power Athlete. And
when you mention those linemen that are like lacking skills, I tell our linemen, I go, listen, you guys want a hand fight, join the wrestling team. You'll learn to do that with your eyes closed. But like you said, guess where they go? To a special place where all they're doing is hitting pads in this controlled, perfect environment.
The one thing that all those kids do, which is so awful, is they haven't figured out that you have to play on your feet at all times. So they're doing like these one-on-one pass throws. They get beat and they just lunge and they just tackle guys to the ground. And then they get up and they think they fucking won. And I'm like, first of all, if you play on the ground, you don't play. So the fact that you're trying to finish dudes in the backside of the pocket, all that means is a quarterback gets his knee blown out or an offensive line gets his knee blown out. If I'm playing offensive line with these dudes and a guy gets beat and you finish him behind me, I'm going to tell the coach to get you the fuck out of here. So for one, fucking big punch, set your feet, and keep that motherfucker in front of you. So I think as I was watching a lot of this, I'm like, man. And then you're like listening to all these dudes that are like who riding on like the comments, like, oh, these kids. I'm like, first of all, none of you played a fucking down. Just because your Instagram handle has a number and it doesn't mean you know what the fuck you're doing. So I'm pretty excited to actually go to Duke's deal just because I want to hear what the message is. And I think that there is a really interesting kind of marriage in this where there has to be enough glitz and glamour and enough of the slickness, but it has to be steeped in this hard work. And these kids have to start fucking buckling down and realizing that the only way you're going to survive this game is by folding the fucking steel. Moving the dirt's a great analogy, but at the end of the day, you got to heat it, you got to temper it, you got to spam it, you got to fold it, you got to cool it, you got to heat it and fold it, and you got to do that 10,000 times to effectively make your blade sharp. So when I was watching a lot of this stuff, I'm just like, man, like these kids are really struggling bending their knees. They don't know how to keep their head off of people. They don't know how to keep dudes in front.
Bend.
That's the difference. That's the difference between those that play and those don't. Are you a waist bender or are you a knee bender? And a lot of these kids are big waist benders because they don't have the leg strength or the flexibility to play low and to play deep and to be able to move through space, keep a dude up, and actually put your hands on people in a meaningful way and fucking dictate and drive and change the angles. So
that's why martial arts is so great. Like, I know you have that boxing background. I did a podcast like 2 months ago with Olin Kreutz.
Yeah.
His private gym has JiuJitsu, boxing, Muay Thai.
Yeah.
They have like a cage just to work on hand fighting.
Yeah.
They're building the total player. And so, I always say adults who created businesses out of everything, I get it. You're trying to help kids. But we need kids doing multiple sports so they can bend, jump, sprint, go through these practices. And a lot of stuff like hit me, like we're talking about earlier, how you said you have to read and write and think through things. I've gone through various iterations of my certification, and you guys have the Power Athlete Block 1, Block 2. And I'm like, man, I have to get back to finding a way for people to travel to the underground, because I'm not helping coaches as they consume the videos. I went from creating a practical where you have to record yourself coaching. I need you to come and train and go through a challenging training session, go through stuff. Our interns, they begin by training. They don't begin by just, I don't know what the hell happens in other places where they're just putting logos upright and cleaning. They have to train. and they'll train one day with a high school kid. The next day they'll train with a middle school kid. The next day they'll train with somebody who's got an injured ankle and we have to work around. The next day they'll train with a kid going through his first trial training session. And I'm like, listen, sometimes you're putting something together on paper, you put up on a whiteboard, and it maybe looks good or it looks easy, and it's fucking hard as hell. And you start realizing how important something simplifying is. And sometimes you're put something together on a board and it looks good, and then you realize you just smoked your back and you haven't even squatted yet. You did too much work before you really did the main thing. So training, as you said, is like how we learned. You doing Dorian Yates's workout, you understood that if I need to build muscle on somebody, we need an element of intensity. Even intensity is very demonized today in the strength and conditioning world because it's not measured.
Not for me.
That's what I'm saying.
But
because you understand the time and place for it.
Well, there was a interesting come to Jesus moment. I'll call it this. Obviously Dorian Yates was like the premier bodybuilder when when I was started training lifting weights, and he's white dude. And he was from a little, obviously like Birmingham, and trained in this dungeon gym. I mean, it was straight up Rocky Balboa shit, which just appealed to my brother and I. So Dorian Yates was our guy. And, all these other guys, Sean Ray, and, all these dudes are out in Venice and fucking the whole
Orange
deal.
County,
yeah, they're all there. So like Dorian Yates was the guy. It wasn't until I got to college and my roommate had the Blood and Guts videotapes.
I bought it from Dorian in person.
Oh, Jesus. Do you still have them?
Dude, ironically and sadly, we're talking about helping young kids. When I was in my early mid-20s and I was at the local gym, I had a milk crate filled with Blood and Guts, his book. It was signed by Dorian. He was with Steve Weinberger at a New Jersey bodybuilding show. I had all that stuff. I gave it to this younger kid who was, I thought was like working hard and I'm going to help mentor him. I gave it to him. I can't remember, but like months later, that I literally traveled and just fucking bled for it.
And he just threw it away?
So who knows what happened to him? The kid just completely disappeared from showing up at the gym. And I think, that and many other times with the internet, it's taught me that people struggle to respect free information because there's just no skin in the game.
No. I'll rephrase it. People do not appreciate free shit. Just put it that way. People do not appreciate free shit. It's true. Like 100%. We gave away free programming for years, and there were a lot of people that did, but they came to the seminars and it was their way of giving back. A lot of people never gave back, never bought a shirt. And you know what? You can't worry about that. I think you have to put out good content, and then hopefully it comes back. But what I was saying was we watched Blood and Guts, and all of a sudden as I'm watching this, I'm like, oh, I completely fucked this up. Dorian Yates is obviously one set to failure, and he's got this fucking die on the sword, final intensity fucking set. What I didn't understand was that, he's doing bent rows with 585 for, literally strapped up, dying on this final. Right. He did 135, 225, 315, 405, 455. Yeah, he did all these volume. He did all the volume on the bottom side and got to built all this volume working up to it, and then had this one final die on the sword. And also they were these workouts get done in 45 minutes.
Over an hour. It took him probably over an hour with his warm up.
If not longer.
Adding weight.
So I don't know how the video was cut, but those workouts were probably 90 minutes at least. And maybe it was for the video, they had to do extra or whatever. But we're timing this thing. And I'm like, dude, when you squat, so I get into this too on the programs, on Power Athlete programs. How long should I rest? How long should these workouts take me? And I'm like, it's completely dependent on how strong you are. So if I got to squat 500 pounds today for, let's say 4 to 6 reps,
that takes time.
I got to go. Yeah. I got to do 135, 225. I got to work in some hamstrings. I got to do a little bit. It's going to take me 25, 30 minutes to really get through the warm up, get ready, and hit my top sets. These people that are oh, this is too long. It took me 70 minutes. And I'm like, okay, well, how strong are you? If your top set's 225 and you got 1 or 2 warm ups, you're fucking around too much.
I hate sitting around in the gym, so I'm constantly trying to move and do stuff. That's why
I think I'm like that too, because we are parents and entrepreneurs, and
I got a lot of shit to do.
We got a lot of shit to do, and
so when Matt comes, he comes at 6 a.m. And what I'll do is
I'd love to train with that 6 a.m. group.
Dude, you're welcome anytime. So he comes at 6, and we go up there, and he has to leave by like 7:15 because he's got to take care of his kids. So we have roughly 75 minutes to get this fucking thing done.
That's awesome.
And then we had about 6 minutes today when he was playing me a bunch of Jerky Boys stuff from you, and he just texted me and said, "Hey, tell Zach he's a pussy." So
we have been killing the text messages.
Oh yeah, no. Well, it was funny when I introduced him to do. He's like, I felt like I've known Zach my whole life. He's like, I know 100 Zachs, and like he's probably saying the same thing because you guys are fucking meathead wrestlers. But that Dorian Yates thing, when I saw the video and I saw the level of intensity and focus and like his philosophy on like, you can tap dynamite, but if you fucking hit it with a hammer as hard as you can, it's going to blow up. Like I saw that and I was like, I know exactly what he's talking about now. I know the level of intensity I have to go into the gym.
And if you look at old Casey Viator photos, he's incline benching 405.
Yeah.
Mike Menzer is deadlifting 5 plates. And Tom Platz also. Tom Platz went
was a
into
volume
high
guy. He was a high volume.
He went very deep into the intensity. And check this out. I don't know if we ever spoke about this training method, but Cal Dietz is a good friend of yours. I love Cal. Well, in the 90s, one of our he's not alive anymore, but one of the nutrition guys at the gym was in touch with Dorian, and he had Dorian's whole like drug regime. The guy I trained with was like following Dorian's stack. Drug stack. And same thing with our nutrition. We did the carb cycling, and I had to do it for 6 weeks because I was natural. The other guys did it for like 2 weeks, and they followed Dorian's model. But here's the training program I wanted to tell you about. It fucking killed me. And now I look back and I'm like, oh, like the power of being able to recover when you're on drugs. I believe Charles Poliquin wrote it up in. It may have been the early day Muscle Media magazine, but basically you would pick an exercise, usually one per body part, and you would work up to a hard set somewhere around 10, so 8 to 12 reps. When you could no longer, when you reached failure, now your training partners would add weight to that exercise, and they would lift it for you, and you would do a negative, 3 to 5 negatives.
Force negatives.
We did it. I'm going to give you an example. Like, let's say I'm incline benching 275 on the Smith machine and I get 8. Then they throw on another plate and you fight the negative, lift. They would do that we were doing it on tricep push downs where we'd have to like stack, pin another 45. We would do it on calves. You would do it on predominantly machines. Like you wouldn't do it on like a bench press or a squat. But, I can't believe I trained that way and I was natural. I think the only way I survived was because I thought that's how you train. I'm a wrestler. We just go until death. But we would do it in like 4 to 6 week cycles. And I remember like noticing like my fucking calves, my chest, my shoulders, things were growing. But I was not smart enough to like take an article and understand how to plug it in a little bit. All right, let's pull back on that.
Sure.
Or like you're saying, all the time, kill yourself, max out, 2 forced reps, then drop set. You have to have that ebb.
No, you got to periodize through that. And even in like Jack Street and those programs, I'll use like some drop sets and like this, and I'll kind of cycle through these different things, and they get a break, and then we'll hit some peaks and this, and like you have to continually work the sets.
Correct.
And then the other problem too is, and this is funny because I actually heard Dorian and then also Arnold and Tom Platz and these guys kind of talking about their drug programs. And Tom Platz is like, I didn't really take anything. He's like, maybe it was a little bit of this. And then Arnold's like, we took a little bit just before the contest. And
like
even
12 weeks before the contest.
And then even Dorian was a little more forthcoming, but I think those guys have done either they have
memory amnesia, or maybe I don't know. I just like seeing the thickness, and like I'm not discounting Dorian's training or what he did at all. I mean, the guy was a fucking warrior in that way. But to say that like, oh, it was very, very basic. We didn't do this and this, and then you see the guys today, and it's like, fuck, dude, like. I don't know if the food is different or the training's different, but like,
listen, now many of them are dying. Here's the other thing, John, is once Lee Haney stepped down, Lee Haney was competing around 245. Arnold competed around 230. Then Dorian hit 275, ripped, and then I think it was Nasser El Sunbadi
260 something, and then Nasser showed up at like 280.
Yeah, and so I remember seeing Nasser winning the Night of Champions in New York. I always tell you, the China Club.
Yeah,
we always talk about. I went into the China Club at age 19 because the bouncers were from Diamond Gym. That was a good thing. Speaking of martial arts, I remember seeing one guy was like learning like early kickboxing, Muay Thai. He was a bouncer in New York, so. In Diamond Gym, you had a lot of bouncers and stuff like that. So I was not 21 and able to get into clubs in the city. But I remember seeing those guys go from that 230, 235 on average to 275. Yeah. And so they had to take, I don't know what they took. In fact, the kid I competed against, I remember when we started, he was short and fat. And everybody was like, there's no way this guy could beat Zach. Zach's a killer, blah, blah, blah. And then I overheard them in the locker room being like, I don't want to mention his name. They're like, oh, so-and-so's on more shit than a racehorse. And 6 months after we started training, I saw him in a tank top. And I was like, whoa. It just like took the wind out of my sails. Like he was jacked and ripped. And that's when I learned the power of drugs. Because when he trained with us a few times, we destroyed him. Intensity wise, with the weights, I was even stronger than him. But whatever he was injecting into his body,
it fucking works. I mean, I think what happened, where the big change happened, was with insulin and GH. I think
yes.
I think the steroids, like one of my favorites is there's a couple bodybuilders and whatever, and they're pretty honest with their stuff, and then also like the Trained by JP. He's got a website. He's a big bodybuilder and coaches a lot of guys in the UK, and he's got a website and forums. And those guys are pretty honest with what they take. And it's like, they're taking, X amount of grams a week of this, and they take this. And it's not like, oh, we take a little test, a little primo. It's like the amount of shit these guys take. And then there's always pretty high levels of insulin and GH. So I really
I've seen guys inject insulin
So
after training. And
well, because my son is type 1, I have a very interesting perception of how insulin works, and the way I understand it, having a son who's type 1, it's very different than the way these guys do it. So knowing the effects of insulin and how they work, especially like the the long acting, the basal, which would be like Levemir, insulin R, which would be a medium, and then Humalog, which is the fast. So like knowing how we kind of base his insulin kind of protocol dosages based on like protein. So, the R covers the protein, the Humalog is the fast, covers the carb, and then the basal is done with the Levemir. So we've got almost to be like wizards in terms of like looking at his diet, looking what he needs, where he is, and then all of a sudden, the temperature shoots up to 100 degrees. Now all of a sudden it's like everything we knew when it's cold is different now that it's hot, because the body temperature, and he's out, and he's at camp all day. So then now all of a sudden blood sugar is going to be high, and then there's like a bit of this, and you'll get crashes. So like it's like kind of trying to hit in a moving target. And then for him, he also is something called the honeymoon stage, where his beta cells still work intermittently. So a lot of these kids, the beta cells are fried; they don't produce any insulin.
What do you send him to camp with to eat? Is his does he have the thing on the back of the tricep?
So he has what's called
the phone.
Yeah, he has a CGM that goes to a phone, and then it pipes to our stuff, so it like hits my watch. And then what it is
what snacks are you sending him to the camp with?
He eats a high protein diet.
Like that's the base of his diet. Everything's based upon a high protein diet. So he eats either like chicken. He eats a ton of pork ribs and then obviously red meat. But we try to do all the red meat earlier in the morning or in the day. At night, red meat tends to spike him, and then it's usually leaner proteins.
Where are you getting the pork ribs from? Are you hunt from the pigs you hunt on your
No,
land?
I go to there's a pretty good butcher. Yeah, a pretty good butcher I buy pork ribs from, and I just do them in the oven. And he just likes ribs. And so there was a while there where I was feeding what I call the predator diet, where everything had to be on the bone. So, but I understand like how insulin works in terms of the transport
diet.
and this.
Better buy that website.
Yeah. But the amazing thing is when you look at these bodybuilders, and like the first time I heard about somebody using insulin, so insulin's the most powerful muscle building compound in the body, right? It's how you shuttle nutrients to the cell. Once it gets there, it locks things down. I mean, it's usually as a transport. Milos has always been a big insulin guy.
Sarchev?
Yeah. He was.
What about the Tim Belknap of the early 80s?
Well,
he was diabetic.
So that was how it got in. So there was a diabetic bodybuilder that kind of used it and was pretty interesting because he could time up his carbs.
He was extremely thick.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, so Milos has really been the wizard on this. And so he's done some podcasts and like kind of video stuff and talked about their insulin protocols. And so I've logged on and kind of like checked into it because I'm just fascinated by like, okay, I know how insulin works for a type 1. How are these guys using it? And the amounts and how they're using it is absolutely insane compared to how I know how to use it. Like they're like taking like 18 IUs pre-training and then they're doing this and this. And I look at it and I can't, like, I almost need to talk to these guys. Like one to be like, I don't understand how any of this works based upon how you use it. I know how it works for a type 1 who doesn't produce insulin, but how you guys are using it is absolutely fucking insane.
Yeah, it's from when you were talking about like the quantities, one of the first gyms I went to, Rich Gaspari, was a bodybuilder there. And so I remember guys saying about the gym owner, they're like, basically he told Richie to double everything that everybody else is doing. And so Richie turned pro at age 19 and was, number 2 in the world at age 20. So they said he doubled it. And that's what I think is going on. It's like more of stuff. And I don't know what, we just talk about this, I feel like the world is in that place, even with sports. Like, hey, somebody posted on Twitter yesterday, they're like, pro athletes don't play 4 or 8 games in a weekend. So why are 12-year-olds doing it?
Well,
we're in a world of more, but not, my motto is I've never seen athletes do so much stuff yet achieve so little in return.
I'm going to take that a step further and say I've never seen at a time when we have so much convenience and technology and yet nobody has any time for anything. I thought that like smartphones and Zoom and all this other shit, I figured email, all this stuff was going to just increase productivity because it was going to make us have more time. Dude, I've never met a time where, there's more technology, more this, and people have less time to do shit. It's pretty fascinating, but
I think if they looked at the time spent on the phone, they would realize that they're just not getting shit done. They're what's that quote? Do not confuse activity with achievement.
No, activity with achievement. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. And so that's where we are. All right, you're going to the gym, but it's not working. And I hate to tell it to you that way, but that's why I want you to train with us at the school, because what you're doing, you're still the same size as last year, or you only gained 5 pounds and you're in high school. You should be looking at the weights and getting better, or you're going to be a junior and you're barely squatting 135. That is a liability.
Well, but like, what's the future, right? Like, I mean, if most kids, like their athletic kind of life kind of expires at 18 years old, correct. I think we're in an interesting piece where there's just
7% will compete in college. Yeah. Maybe 10%.
Well, I mean, so you have a situation where most of these kids are not going to have longevity outside of high school. So, okay, so they want to try to develop and I've told people, dude, if you're not training to maximize your high school experience, that's a miss. I was very fortunate. I got to go to college and then obviously got to go play in the NFL. So but I have buddies on Facebook and I saw today one of my, guy who's a year older than me. who I played with, guy Matt Youngs, he lost his father like when I was a junior in high school, his senior year of football. And I realized today his sister posted something. She's like, this is the 30th Father's Day that we have been missing my dad. And I looked at the day and I was like, holy shit, dude, I remember that. That was in high school. And like that dude, that was his, his crowning moment, and he played. I was fortunate in that was like just the scratching of the surface. But there's so much genetic, if I didn't grow to be as tall as I was and wasn't able to put on size, the knowledge, succeeding in spite of terrible training and terrible diet and all the things we did and the luck to get there. There's a lot of stuff. So, I think maybe the message for a lot of these parents, and even, my son's playing baseball, I tell these parents, I'm like, dude, they just need to have a good time. Like they're not getting ready to go play for the Yankees. And if they do, like that, like attrition, that sorting, we'll call like from Harry Potter, the sorting hat, like that sorting hat isn't going to happen until like a little bit later. And you're going to see the difference. And all of a sudden the kids are going to walk out. These kids are going to be here. One kid's going to be here. The kid's throwing here and this kid's hitting dongs over the deal. Or you go out and you play football and, all of a sudden you're going to see like there's going to be a few kids that are remarkably different than everybody else. Those are the ones that'll have an opportunity. And even those kids will go and maybe never get to play.
And even this, though, like I always tell these athletes, I go, you're just not hitting your peak at age 18, guys. What you can become at age 20, 21, 22, when you're still in college is going to be light years ahead. And I tell the athlete, here's an interesting thing, too. I'll tell athletes, especially with baseball, where they have cuts, basketball. I say, listen, especially baseball, a lot of kids go out for baseball, and they've been playing the sport since age 5. If you get cut, it's not the end. Who you are at age 14 or 15 is not who you could be next year. You could get on a travel team. You could keep training here, and we could get you better. We can transform you. Yeah. But as soon as they get cut, many of them quit baseball or quit, and they're like, one kid's like, yeah, I think it's just time to move on with my life. I'm like, move on with what? You're 15. Why not fight back?
He's like, chicks. I'm going to move on with my life and just try to pull chicks. Like one of,
they're giving up, in my opinion, is like, why not just actually apply yourself? You wanted to be part of the team. And the reality is these other kids are working, and that's how they're getting that position. And so I think what's hey, we're going to have fun. We have a great time when we train, but what's not fun is like doing all this stuff and then you come back and you're not strong. So I don't know what you're doing. You're not getting better. Let's get you better. Let's give you an opportunity to actually play and compete.
Well, and really set a foundation for the rest of your life. I still lift weights at least 3-4 days a week. I picked up JiuJitsu last year because, my daughter, wanted to do it. And she's like, Dad, I don't want to do it by myself. And I'm like, fuck it. I'll do it with you. So, that's how that whole thing happened. And like, we still go 2 days a week. And now I, obviously have kind of, go more, and I've been training those guys, and it's kind of like typically work in. But like, that's how it all started. And like, it's kind of nice at like, 45, 46 years old to be like, yeah, I'll go learn a new skill, and I'm athletic enough and like in good enough shape to be able to go do this. Like we had a dude last night at class that, I don't know how old he was, but like showed up for his first day and gets into the deal, and we're kind of rolling, and he's obviously getting smashed because it's his first fucking day. But like I got to roll a few rounds with him, and the dude was so physically smashed. Like we were just doing some guard play, just a little bit of guard passing, and Shanji has this deal called a weave guard, where you kind of like weave your arm and kind of grab the knee and pass guard. We were supposed to like pass the guard, and Shanji's like, hey, after you pass the guard, just reset. So we were kind of practicing it, and then last 10 minutes, he's like, hey, if you pass the guard, just go to a submission. So I'm like going with this dude. I pass his guard. He literally, as I passed the guard, laid flat on his back and was like dying. And I was like, no, we haven't stopped yet. Like, you got to keep going. And then we get done. And I told him, I was like, yo, man, you going to join? He's like, yeah. I'm like, join. Set a consistent training schedule that you can make. Like if it's 2 days a week, come every 2. If it's 3, like don't tell me you're going to come 6 because it's fucking bullshit. Start at 2 or start at 3. If it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, just make sure
don't overwhelm yourself.
Don't overwhelm yourself. Be consistent. Like all these people are like, oh, I'm going to go 6 days a week. I'm like, the only person I know.
Consistency over intensity.
Dude, the only person I know that went 6 days a week and became a brown belt in like 5 years was Andy Stumpf.
right? The gym was like a 5-minute walk from his house. He went every day, didn't have shit to do, and just went and trained 6 days a week, and he could do it. But if you have a job and all this other stuff, just set a consistent schedule. For me, it's like Mondays and Wednesdays for sure. If I can get to a Saturday open mat or this, and I kind of try to get another day, like I'll take Jamie today and I might roll tonight, but just do something consistent. And then the guy's like, he's like, do you lift weights? I'm like, yeah. He's like, how do you manage lifting weights and doing this? I'm like, this isn't fucking hard. I'm like, dude, it's 40 minutes.
They overthink
it's
it.
40 minutes, right? So roughly what we do is we get in, we warm up, which is fine. And then there's a teaching session. So the teaching thing might take 25 minutes. And you break into your partners. You do kind of some like very like low level, like low intensity, 40, 50% positional stuff. Then you kind of ramp up the intensity, and we might get maybe 10 or 15 minutes. I might get maybe 3 or 4 rounds at the end, right? So when I look at my whoop, I'm like, all right, so I basically was in zone 1, zone 2, and in the last 10 minutes, I might be in like zone 2, zone 3, maybe into 4. I'm like, dude, that's not a lot of work. But
it's dialed in, it's strategic. And I say this to the high school kids. I go, today was an amazing day. Your effort, your energy, it was awesome. But I said, the real tough guy is going to be consistent.
Yeah.
So today was just one day. We still have 2.5 months.
It's like moving dirt. Some days you get a shovel, some days you get a spoon, and you got to move the dirt. And
keep showing up and just be consistent. Like that guy who's struggling, he's probably like looking at online programs like, oh, there's fucking 15 exercises. Hey, man, why don't you wake up in the morning, pick 2 exercises and do 5x5, do, I don't know, just do 2 things and spend 10 minutes on it. Squats, push-up, recline row, farmer walk. It's amazing how just you do the right stuff, the return of investment is very powerful.
I've always said the person that can train for the greatest amount of time with the highest relative intensity will be the one that is the most successful over the long time. And I think people look at everything in a sprint, like the same in jits. As long as I can go 2 or 3 days a week and I can improve and get better, like I don't get overly romanced with belts or any of this other shit. Like I would
always a white belt, that's why.
Well, it's always a white belt, but I've seen situations where some of my toughest rolls have come from white belts, and I've seen guys that were wearing a brown belt that I was like, oh. So I mean, it's kind of inconsistent. But then you like roll with the dude like Victor Hugo or Shanji Habero and these guys. Like Joe Rogan had a great quote where he said, "Not all black belts are created equal." And he's like, so like I've rolled with dudes that are black belts that are pretty decent, and then you roll with dudes that are absolute monsters, to the point where you're like, there wasn't a single point in that entire session that I ever felt I was doing okay or I was in a good position. And these guys are just like, and then the worst is, so Philippe is one of the kids I train. He's really good, and he'll always be like, "Coach, you're doing so well," like as he's fucking smashing me. He'd be like, "Oh, you dude," he's like, "Keep coming," and he's like, basically
feel that you are now learning a position and you're starting to gain. You're not completely helpless. And in jiu-jitsu, I feel it takes you 6 months before something starts to just click.
Well, all of a sudden I have this spider sense, which I call is like my spider sense of bad position, where all of a sudden I like feel myself getting into a bad position and I know I got to change something. So like last night when I was rolling with that kid, as I was letting him pass my guard and doing some stuff and like letting him like kind of teaching him like, hey, weave your hand here. All of a sudden he put his butt high, and I just kicked his leg and he fell over. And then the other one, he was trying to do it again and he was too high. I just kicked his other leg and he kept falling over. I'm like, dude, you gotta sink your 7 gram. You can't get your ass that high. You're going to get tea kettled. And that shit used to happen to me. You get swept constantly because your fucking center of gravity is too high. So the ability
also, you have your boxing background, obviously your football background, and even training background. You always talk about posture and position. Yeah. And so I remember when I would coach at the college level, I would teach a certain lift, and then I would show the guys, I'd be in on a single with them. Look at my position here. Yeah. Now look at my position. Where do we score? That makes sense. All right, we're going to shoulder this heavy med ball. Where do I want to be? Back here, move up to it. Position. Yep. Because right now you understand position in jiu-jitsu, and once you understand position, you now like, it's not almost like, all right, you're learning moves, but the most important thing is learning position, because once you learn position, you can now do things like you You just understand
it. And the only way you do it is you got to spend time on the mat, and you got to be consistent. Like if you come 5 days and you don't come for 2 weeks, like there's constantly people we see that are like, I see them like a whole bunch and then I don't see them. Like I just would rather be like the consistent, like a wave. The waves just keep breaking. Like
inconsistency is a roller coaster
yeah,
effect.
I don't go to Newport Beach for 2 years. I walk right back to where my house is. I walked right out, and those waves are the exact same waves. And like that level of consistency, I'm like, that's what I want. I just want to be like the wave breaking. You just keep coming back and being consistent. Sometimes they're bigger, sometimes they're small, but they just keep breaking. So, well, Zach, dude.
It's so non-sexy, but it's the most powerful and effective way.
Yeah, dude. I think that's like 2.5 hours, bro.
Yeah, brother.
Yeah. So I'm going to cut you there because we could fucking chew the fat and bullshit
all
forever.
Day.
But
all day, all night.
If people want to get a hold of you, I know you're all over social. You're easy to find. How do they get a hold of you? How do they learn more about underground strength?
Strong Life Podcast. And Google Z Even-Esh. That'll take you to all the socials. And then I think my newsletter, ZachStrength.com, people will really love. And that's it, man.
Well, dude, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Power Athlete Radio. And I appreciate you for carrying the mantra of fucking old school, consistent, tough motherfuckers that eat an anabolic diet.
Bye. Hells yeah.